Hey, I'm Mr. Ghost. If you love true horror stories, consider subscribing. It really helps the channel grow. The stories you'll hear are shared by our audience from Reddit, and to keep their original essence, I read them exactly as they were written. Before we begin, let me know in the comments, where in the world are you listening from? Also, check the timestamps in the comments for story titles and easy navigation. Now, let's dive into the darkness. Help. This toaster I found ruined my life. February 13th, 2025. Mind writing this in case something happens to me. At least some unfortunate soul will know what happened. Yesterday, me and my friend Rover were playing on an abandoned plane. We loved searching for things forbidden to be searched, and had a love for aerial atrocities. While searching an abandoned plane, we found this really cool toaster. It was made of gold and had eyes on its side for some weird reason. It had the words "Glash Knock" on it. Me and Rover didn't know what it meant. God, how naive we were. We shrugged and took it home because my mother needed a new toaster because we were poor. Being poor was not always easy growing up. We had no money, and as a result had no food. I live in Wisconsin. Funny thing about Wisconsin, our state is actually known as America's Dairyland for our prominent dairy industry. I do remember my mother always making toast in a toaster for us, because it was our favorite treat. Since dairy was so cheap here, Mama could always afford a nice tall glass of milk to wash down the crunchy and satisfying taste of toast. The toaster was blue and had red outlines. It had the words "Hang in there" tattooed on its side with a funny little cat hanging on some rope. Yeah, right. Like I'd believed that. Whenever I was down, I'd flip a penny. I used to have a boyfriend named Rover, and he was awesome, except for when he'd hit me. I didn't like that part. I eventually broke up with him because he kept making mean jokes about my toaster, including calling it stupid and dumb. I kept being his friend because he asked me to, so I accepted. Today I was watching the hub when Rover came over, and I said, "Hey Rover, you came over," grinning from ear to ear. He said, "Yes, I did. How's things?" I said, "Let's play Gmod," and he said, "Okay, fine, but did you bring the toaster? It's super cool." This answer unnerved me. He always was reluctant to play the video games I loved. To just give in wasn't like him. I gave him the toaster to gaze at anyway. What's the worst that could happen? He threw a firecracker on the ground and ran away. I also noticed my toaster was taken. I knew I had to get revenge on my fallen sidekick and put on my jacket. That toaster was my best friend. If Rover had your best friend, you would done the same thing. I knew I had to search for him. That toaster could be sold worth a fortune. If it was old or part of some celebrity's cabin, I needed to sell it for money. Not to mention, Rover made the mistake of stealing my best friend. I went to Rover's trailer. It was at the edge of town. I've never actually seen the inside of it, but determination built up. I went to his trailer. To put it lightly, the trailer wasn't well kept. The grass was up to my knees in the front lawn. Guess they don't like mowing the lawn. The trailer was rusting and stained with mud and water damage. One of the windows was broken. It had been for many months. Unfortunately, they had a sign that said "No visitors," so I couldn't get through. Feeling defeated, I went to go buy an egg. I wandered to the lonely gas station, called the Lonely Gas Station. Walking inside, the AC hit me like a truck, and I almost fell down. It's been days since I felt the cool breeze of the AC machine. The gas station never changed in years. Its worn red and white paint more of a charm than a sign they should remodel, even though they definitely should. I picked up an egg and went to the dusty counter, but something was wrong. A silhouette of a piece of toast was walking. I screamed loud, then I remembered. I was in a store and quickly stopped the scream. The toast stopped moving, and I wanted to scream again. The egg was 40 cents, and I screamed at the price. But again, it was a crowded store. I was immediately banned from the store because I didn't pay for the price of the egg. So much for that endeavor. Outside, down on my luck, I sat on the wet pavement. Strange. It rained yesterday. I opened up my TikTok to look up toaster mythology. Apparently in 2021, an Italian man documented his monster hunting channel. I screamed loudly as I saw him enter the same wreck we did once before. He saw this thing. I've never seen anything like it. It had a tall, slender body with eyes at the tip of its fingers, with two big empty eye sacs at the front of its face. Its mouth always slack-jawed. The more I looked, the more real it felt. It didn't feel like some sort of CGI. I could feel it staring at me through the screen. Albino in nature. I saw this demon of the night shapeshift into the toaster I used to have. The Italian man took it home and promised to give us updates, but he never uploaded it again. Feeling defeated, I stuffed the phone back into my pocket as a strange man walked up to me. He was frowning and had the eyes of a lost dog, wearing a fedora and Little Einstein shirt on. He handed me a small letter addressed to me from the forest, Wisconsin. It read, "I am your secret admirer and need you to come to the forest. There you will find what you need." I told the man, "I don't even know where that is. It's not on Google Maps." He pointed behind him. Behind the gas station was a medium-sized forest, but it was strange, since Google Maps never marked it as a location. I swallowed hard and knew what I needed to do. I told him I didn't want to go into the forest because it sounds spooky. He explained I'd get $5 out of it if I went, and with newfound determination I descended into the forest. Walking through the forest, I saw the sun peek its head through the trees. The smell of pine hit my nose and I smiled. This wasn't the worst place to investigate. I saw decaying trees and critters. The critters seemed to fight with each other for survival. God, this world we live in. While watching the critters fight, I realized something. I was falling, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. Now, I screamed a blood-curdling call as my face hit the earth. When I looked up, I realized I tripped on a twig. Who put that there? Strange, I thought. I brought out my backpack and sat on a log. The wood caressed my skin. I've always liked the woods. I flipped my penny, feeling hopeless. It landed on heads. Tum. Its cold metallic body hit my hand, and it landed on heads. Strange, I thought. I looked at a picture of me and my toaster having fun. I shed a tear as I reminisced about the simpler times. The picture had me in my red cape zooming around my room with my toaster, having a similar red cape in my arms. I got out a carton of milk. I thought better to drown my sorrows in a dairy treat. At least I could afford milk. While drinking milk, I opened TikTok on my phone again. I continued my journey of learning penny tricks. While watching, I spun the penny at great speed in my hand like a basketball. Look out, NBA. Here I come. I accidentally spun the penny too hard, and it made a thud noise on the ground. I went to go pick it up, but then I felt it. A chill ran up my spine as next to the penny, a piece of bread lay lonesome. I could hear someone snicker behind me, and arrows came raining down. I looked up and saw 5 masked men holding onto trees. It seemed like they all had shirts with a skull on it, and hockey masks like what you would see out of Friday the 13th. I screamed as loud as I could, picked up my backpack and ran in a random direction out of fear. I could hear the men shouting behind me as the wind started hitting my face. I could have sworn I saw the golden toaster out of the corner of my eye. I eventually stopped to catch my breath. I knew I should join track. I felt sweat dripping down my forehead as my heart started to steady. I could no longer hear their footsteps. I needed to rest. There was a small cave on the side of the woods. It could see the water from yesterday still dripping at the top of the cave's mouth. I prepared my sleeping bag and put down my picture of me and the toaster. This is where I'll end the journal today. I probably watch some Markiplier and drift to sleep. If any of you have any tips, please let me know. February 14th, 2025. Nice. I woke up today, groggy from sleeping on Mother Nature's floor. While eating breakfast, I saw something on the cave walls. I didn't see the night before. It was strange. The drawing looked old, the color was faded, and rock was cracked. It looked like some sort of map. I saw the cave I was in, and the path I ran from. At the end of the map, there was a man blindfolded, with a third eye above his head. Some sort of wise man, or prophet perhaps. I don't know, but this is the closest clue I have, so I will follow it. I checked my phone, and realized it was February 14th. It reminded me of me and my ex-boyfriend Rover. I pulled out a picture of Rover flexing his muscles. Me and Rover had a strange relationship. He'd come over, I'd feed him, and he'd go home. I'd always make him my favorite snack, toast. He'd grin like the lights, and wolf it down while chugging Wisconsin's most prized drink, milk. Then he'd leave without a word. One night I suggested we go watch a movie. He put on his rings and punched me. He then spit in my face and broke my mirror. God, things were so much simpler in those days. I didn't like when he did that, but he always scarfed my food down, clearly enjoying it. So, mixed bag. Anyways, better to think about the task at hand. I took a selfie next to the map and experienced newfound confidence. I did a little jig, my feet fire on the imaginary dance floor, as I celebrated getting closer to the truth. It was about time there was some good news. After a couple minutes of dancing, I started to trek through the forest once more, leaves crunching beneath my feet. I realized my phone was dead, because I watched too much Markiplier last night. Strange, I thought. Eventually, I hit a waterfall. I smiled. Finally, some good fortune. I thought, yesterday was horrible. I deserved to have some fun. I put on my one piece and some swimming goggles and descended into the water. It was cold yet refreshing. A couple minutes later I was doing backstrokes when I realized something was off. As I emerged from the depths, I gasped, but not for lack of air. I saw some of the guys from before, or at least I thought I did. They were different now. They wore big tanks on their backs. What were they storing? Connecting to the tank they had what seemed to be a cannon or hose towards the end. But that was the least of my concerns. They both had me at gunpoint. Not good. I recognized their Nightmare on Elm Street shirts. These were definitely the mysterious assailants from the day prior. "Put your hands up," one of them commanded, holding what looked to be a handgun. "Okay," I said. Lily livered. "Rover put us through hell and back, trying to find this chick," the younger-looking one muttered. I thought, Rover, my Rover. He wanted to discard me like some sort of discardable thing. As I was thinking that thought, the bread people I saw yesterday started coming into my line of sight behind the two men, slowly inching their way towards them. They looked bloodthirsty. I wasn't going to say anything. The creatures might be able to kill them. I just have to keep the two men distracted on me, I thought to myself. Why are you being so mean?" I asked in a weak tone. "Because Rover has shown us the light. He's shown us something much bigger than you or me. He let us make a difference." "Okay, cool," I said. "Now get out of the wad." And the first guy was cut off. The bread people were starting to crawl under his hand. For one shorts, blood spewed from his leg, as he gave off a terrible scream that sounded a little something like H, 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 H. "Get it off me," he pleaded with the older-looking man with a scar across his eye. The older gentleman aimed his cannon, but just as he was about to pull the trigger, two more latched onto either side of his legs. They made their way up its back, leaving bite marks everywhere. The older man fell over as five of them all started to eat him. Some of them even burrowed in his eyes like some sort of burrow thing. With the last of his strength, he pulled out what looked to be a giant water balloon, and with a dying plea, popped the water balloon on them. The bread people started to make a moaning noise as they slowly disintegrated. It looked like it burned them slowly. They stopped eating its now dead meal and started to make this horrible low groaning noise as they all disintegrated. I think water killed it, only leaving the two dead men in their wake. I looked at them. It looked as if a bear mauled them. I would not want to be them right now. I thought silently. I'm not cut out for this. I saw the murder of two men, in just a girl in a very big world. I was slowly starting to freak out as the weight of the moment just hit me. Thoughts started to pour out of my mind and into my mouth. I screamed as their radio crackled to life. "Alpha 1 to Morpheus, 35. You've been out there for a pretty long time. What's going on? Over. This could not be happening. I had to make my escape from this crime scene. They were soon going to find out what happened." I hesitantly got out of the water, fearing there might be more. As I looked around, my fears were quelled. I quickly shook the water off like a wet dog and started to think of hiding spots. The waterfall. It was perfect. That giant watery guardian was my best shot at not being found. It's close enough to the massacre, and as a result they won't look there for long. After all, who the hell would stay? I quickly slung on my clothes and searched for anything useful on their bodies. I found the handgun and in my head imagined I just gained XP. I smiled as I found a battery pack I could charge my phone with. Cool beans. I snuck up the side of the waterfall and got to the back end of it. Something was different about it. There wasn't a backside. It was a small cave nobody could see from the outside. How strange. I slowly sauntered into the cave with my flashlight ready in my hand. As the light peered into the cave, I noticed someone snuffed out a fire. Strange, I thought. I ventured deeper into the cave and saw like 4 bats flying around me. I decided to set up camp in the cave. I was beginning to feel like a caveman, LOL. Anyway, I put the sleeping bag on the ground and watched the playlist of Happy Wheels made by Jacksepticeye. Before I pressed play, I thought about everything that happened today. Rover's betrayal made my heart grow dark, and my thoughts icy cold. I pressed play and the Irishman screamed as he lost and won. He grew quieter and quieter as I drifted to sleep once more. February 15th, 2025. My Darokan screamed. I saw I was not alone in this secluded cave. There was a young kid, no older than 14, studying me from afar. He was slender and petite and small. I looked into his troubled eyes. He didn't seem too happy from where I was sitting. "Double, who are you, and what's your name?" I said with little confidence. I was never awarded such a luxury. He said blankly. "How about Sparky?" said our hero. "Okay, so why are you here?" I prodded. "Same reason you are." Sparky took out his knife and whittled the wet bark off of a piece of wood and threw the now dry stick into the fire. "And that is," I prodded more. Sparky took out a piece of fresh meat, its blood still dribbling from the cut. "Him from that cult you encountered was actually born into it. I saw what happened near that waterfall. You must be connected somehow. The only reason I didn't slit your throat last night." He then began to roast the slab of meat over the now dwindling fire I made last night. "What cult are you talking about?" "You mean those freaks?" He garbled a yes, then looked at his food with pride. He only had to flip the meat on the stick a couple of times, and as a result came out finer than he expected. I saw what those fucking monsters are capable of. Something about summoning a god. They needed money for traveling and equipment. They harvest organs and kill whoever stand in their way. "Anyway, food's done, miss. What's your name?" he asked with an impatient tone. "My name is Delilah," I said while taking out my picture of my toaster. I looked at it with longing eyes and a tired look. It had been days since I've seen my friend. I slowly put it back in my backpack. "You're in a lot of pain, my friend. I lost a loved one once, and I hated it because I lost them." Sparky said this with a serious look in his eyes. I could tell he was being as genuine as he could be. I needed to change the subject, both because I couldn't emotionally handle it, and I knew I needed his help. "Sparky, I need help. This cult has something to do with my toaster, and not to mention I need to confront Rover. I would never forgive myself if I just knew about these terrible people and didn't do something about it." He thought for a second, then said, "I need to see them burn for what they did to my family. I'll go with you for this and nothing more. We go our separate ways after this." I nodded in agreement. We snuck back home at night, using the trail Sparky knew so well. I decided Sparky could sleep in our house since my mom was working double shifts at Walmart. She'd be too tired to see my newfound companion. We finally got home, and I smiled with relief. I could sleep in my own bed. I gave Sparky a blow-up air mattress. "This is where I'll end it tonight." Sparky said he's never heard of Markiplier. I think I'll change that tonight. Until next time. February 16th, 2025. We awoke, the air conditioner humming as we prepared for the day. Thank God for the air conditioning because I like it. Me and Sparky discussed how our day was going to go when I heard a noise creeping towards my room. My eyes grew wide, and I turned to Sparky and shooed him to my closet. My door opens with a creak, and my mom with her tired eyes and fake smiles comes in. "Hey Delilah, what's new, cockatoo?" "Mom, you know I'm too old for that nickname," I muttered. She walked to my blow-up mattress and gave a confusing look. I quickly said I slept on it because my bed was uncomfy. "Okay," she said. "Hey Mom, look over there." And I pointed to the opposite direction of the closet. While she was turned, I looked towards the closet. I wrinkled my face and put my hand over my lip, signaling to Sparky to please not talk. Sparky opened the closet and signaled an okay hand sign like this. She turned around and said, "Okay, I better be off to Walmart. I got another double shift." "Okay," I said. She shut my door, and I wiped my brow of the sweat it accumulated. That was a close one. Plans for the day: do good work, drink some milk, investigate monster, live our best life. I wrote down my to-do list for the day, and we quickly both took showers and headed out for the day. "We have to figure out where their next hideout is," I said to Sparky, cracked concrete filling our eyes. We walked down the sidewalk and started to question where to go first. The coffee shop is where a lot of people chit-chat and all that. We might be able to overhear something. Walking into the coffee shop, the smell of coffee beans and baked goods filled the air. I saw the townspeople of Chippewa, which is my town in Dawes County, going about their daily lives. One guy got some chips from the vending machine, and I giggled. Ha, what a tool. Most of the conversation was the current exchange rate of milk in our town. Class 3 and Class 4 milk is going up, and the mayor hasn't done anything about it. Our mayor is not well respected. One guy with a green jacket and black hat sat alone and drank his coffee in silence. I sat down next to him, and Sparky did the same. In silence, the guy drank his coffee as I questioned him and broke the silence. Hiya, can I ask you a few questions? No, he growled. Okay, fine, I said, and then soon after left. Me and Sparky were getting nowhere and fast. On top of that, our tummies were growling. On the damaged and cracked curb while Sparky threw rocks at passing cars. All of a sudden, 3 black limos whooshed by us, and Sparky looked up in the sky and smiled. He had a light bulb going over his head. That's it, Tim Walters, the mayor. I agreed with him. I got on my bike and we followed the 3 limos. I biked up the hill and to the Stinky Sailor. What was the mayor up to now? The Stinky Sailor was the strip club of Chippewa. Chippewa. If you were a dude and had some extra cash, you'd get off work and come here in a flash. It has certainly seen better days. The big highway sign no longer admitting its once neon glow. The paint on the walls are now cracked and foolish. The puddles on the floor are now vast and poolish. I urged Sparky to stay in the parking lot, while I went and talked to the most hated man of Chippewa, population 11,708. I entered the Stinky Sailor, and already smelled the vile stench beer and booze. I walked to the bouncer, and he urged me to take a hit of his blunt. Salmon man. It's good, he suggested. No thanks. Drugs are bad. Quit being a pussy, he said. No, really. I am good at sports and would not want to sully my reputation. He quickly put it in my mouth, and I accidentally inhaled. 1 UTF. He gave me the jolliest rancher in his bag, and I thanked him for it, and went on my way. It was blue raspberry. What a joy. I walked further into the club. The DJ was jumping to the rhythm. The people were all dancing to Party Rock Anthem by LMFAO. The cocktail bar was in full swing. The bartender was doing that thing in basketball, where he balances his cup on his finger, and the strip club goers went wild. My eyes scanned the room for the mayor. I asked one of the bouncers, and they told me he was in the VIP room waiting for his lap dance. I barged in the room and he said, "Who are you?" "I am Delilah. I am with the Chippewa Weekly newspaper." "Fine." He grumbled, "Come on in and sit down." He takes out a bottle of water. He sips. I could tell it wasn't ideal that a reporter found him at a strip club. "What do you want from me?" "My approval ratings are in the toilet," he growled. It was true ever since he was elected in 2023. He's had an average of 20% approval. All they want is milk. I keep trying to give milk, but I can't, because there's too many people and too little milk. I spend too much of the budget on milk. I could tell he was stressed. His hair was a mess. His suit looked like shit. There was no doubt he was in a bad place. The mayor said, "By the way, in Spanish, mayor means better." Just then a martini glass started to transform into those fucking babies I saw kill those people down at the river yesterday in the forest. The mutilated-looking newborn screamed a terrible screech, its skin pores leaking some sort of clear goo. "Mr. Mayor, get down." And I got out my secret squirt gun and lined up the shot. Time seemed to slow as I aimed at it. I squinted and cocked the watery weapon. "Burn in hell," I whispered. SQNIC. It dropped into an ashy puddle and got low on the floor. Water vapor billowed from the barrel of my gun. "Mr. Mayor, meet me at my house at 9:30 p.m. Bring a sleeping bag. I'll explain everything." The mayor looked shocked, but for his own safety he knew it was safer to go along with this than not. He looked shocked but nodded yes. I saw Walters walk into my driveway, sleeping bag in hand, smiling as I opened the door. He looked at me with a big smile, and I shot him a thumbs up. I told my wife I was having a sleepover at a friend's house. "I think she bought it," he explained. I shot him a double thumbs up. As he stepped in my house, 3 black cars drove away. His security team knew no boundaries. I motioned him to come inside my humble abode. He looked inside my house and looked in awe. "Wow, you're so poor." I frowned. "This is your fault. You spent too much on dairy. Now look where I am." He looked like he wanted to respond, but I shot him, not wanting to have an argument when the stakes are as high as they are. A loud spring noise came from the kitchen. "Toast's done." Sparky cheered. pounding on the table with a knife and fork in hand. It's been a while since I got to use my spare toaster from Temu. I whipped out the butter and cinnamon, a treat I enjoyed since I was 8. I am now 22. We enjoyed the light snack. We talked about the big things, and we talked about the little things. Sparky talked about his new name. Walters talked about dairy. I talked about Rover and our relationship. They could tell I was on the verge of tears. They gave me a reassuring pat on the back and a grin to the face. I was whole again. I invited them into my bedroom, and we got into my green tent in the closet. We all sat down crisscross applesauce and held hands. We did this to make Sparky feel normal, as this was tradition in the cult. We were about to talk about our game plan. "We can't let the cultists win," I said. "Yay," says Sparky. Having connections to the underworld and various social services, Walters was able to use his connections to eventually find the hideout, but it would take a couple days, as he could only find the most trustworthy to relay this information. "You can tell Chippenoga about this. The town would freak," I said worryingly. "Don't worry. I won't. My approval ratings would plummet even bigger now." Tim shakes his head at the thought of a lower approval rating than he already had at this time. With a new game plan and a sleepy head, I went to sleep. Tim was rocking the sleeping bag, and Sparky had the air mattress like he did the previous night. I put on the PewDiePie Amnesia series to have a little amnesia of my own, reliving the good old days where I didn't have to worry about creepy creatures. I went to sleep, and was suddenly awoken by a young man's voice yelling at me. It was strange. I was standing. I don't understand it myself, and Tim was standing right alongside me. "Look," shouted Sparky. A couple of townspeople with their eyes shut were all going outside and walking around. Shortly after they went back to their house. "Sparky, what's going on?" "I usually go to sleep for around 4 hours. It makes me anxious to sleep any longer than 4 hours. I just saw you guys sleepwalk out of your beds. I think they might be able to control you in your sleep," Sparky said. I furrowed my brow in frustration. Things were about to get a whole lot harder. February 17th, or 2025. After the night of mayhem, we all thought it'd be better if we all took little cat naps in shifts. I was the first one to sleep on my bed, then Sparky, God bless his soul, then Walters. We all awoke in the morning with the sun greeting us as the birds chirped with cheer. Walters said he could use a beer. I made breakfast and fetched Walters a beer from the fridge. Sparky wanted one, but I wagged my finger and said, "No can do. He's 14 after all." Walters nodded in agreement. This sin was to be kept between the two adults. Tim Walters yelled, "How come your mom isn't here?" I felt colder. It was strange that my mom didn't greet me in the morning. The car was still in my garage. As I was thinking that thought, the police knocked on the door and I screamed at the jump scare. Sparky looked panicked. In the cult he was taught to avoid the police. The door creaked as light poured through the opening, and into my eye. It was the police. I was confused. Why the hell were they here? The officer looked sorrowful. He put his hat in his hands and said, "Sit down. You're gonna wanna hear this. Your mom, well, I'm going to give it to you straight, missy. She walked off a cliff and perished." I dropped my glass of milk. Thousands of things were going through my head. Why? How did this happen? I said frantically, as if asking quicker would bring her back. "I want a full investigation into this matter. By lunch or a tear's hole," Tim Walters roared. I can't remember what happened next. The hour felt like a blur. I remember sitting in my happy place on the roof, next to the toaster my mom bought me. I sobbed for what felt like hours. Tim Walters came to the roof and sat next to me, offering a beer. I shook my head no, and tried to give a weak smile. He shoved the beer in my mouth, and I drank a little WTF. "Put that in your gob," he said while laughing. "It'll help the pain. I know, my grandpa died once, and I hated it because he was dead." I felt my anger rising in my stomach and out my mouth, like some sort of puke. "You don't know what I'm going through. I lost my mom. I lost my Rover. I lost my toaster. I don't have anything," I screamed. Tim Walters said, "Me Delilah. You still have me. You still have me, and Sparky." He looked at me with disappointment, and climbed down the ladder, and slowly walked into my house, and gave a big reassuring smile, for Sparky's sake. I failed to realize it, but Sparky was my son, and Walters had always been like a father to me. We had a common reason to be together, but even so, I could feel like it's been more than just the investigation. I wiped the tears from my eyes, said goodbye to my mom, and joined the two boys once more. February 19th, 2025. We spent a couple days mourning my mom. I played the SNES with Sparky and drank with Walters. Our little dysfunctional family survived the tragedy. I knew this was the work of the cult. That night everyone in our radius sleepwalked. It's no coincidence my mom just happened to kill herself. I promise you, Mom, I will get revenge. The cult will pay. Are we there yet? Piped Sparky. We've been driving for 4 hours. Sparky was getting restless. Not yet, buddy. Michigan is still a couple of hours out. Walters said. How'd you get this information anyway? It only took a couple of days to figure out the cultists' main hideout, I inquired. Tim Walters started sparking a ciggy and gave a half smile. Couple boys at the office knew their way around hacking phones and hacking computers. We got those fuckers now. Sparky gave a proud smile and pointed out Tim Walters' phone. It was buzzing. Chipanoga's callin', Sparky said with a proud smile. Meanwhile I played the pencils jamming out to Dragula and sang with glee. Take it for me, would ya? Sparky talked on the phone with Chipanoga for a couple of minutes. When he hung up, he told us Tim's wife was doing well as a temporary mayor of Chipanoga. Tim Walters sighed a breath of relief and gave a proud smile. I knew he was proud of me. I could tell. We've all only been together for about a day, but we are like a family. I gave a proud smile. A few hours, and some McDonald's later, we were in Lansing, Michigan. We stopped at a gas station. I peered out my window at a group of hooligans playing darts. They were all thuggish and wearing Scream merch. Funny thing about Michigan, it is the home of darts. It is a huge deal in this state. I checked Tinder. No matches. Darn. Riding there, I saw the vast skyscrapers towering over me, and the more impressive size of homeless people begging me for money. We arrived at what looked like another skyscraper. It was so impressive. Tim Walters furrowed his brow in confusion. The coordinates say it's right here. How the hell did the boys back at the office screw this one up? I looked at him with wide eyes, hands trembling, and uttered, what if this is the right place? What if this is the hideout? We all looked at each other in fear, and saw a chimp-like man running into the giant building with a piece of toast in his mouth. He had on smallish glasses and an alien trademark shirt. Sparky looked with shock and said, the way we identify each other is with horror merch on. That is their HQ, no doubt. I felt dizzy and nearly fainted on the pavement below. It was clear we couldn't waltz into that titan of a building. We would have to figure out a plan. February 20th, 2025. After a long-fought battle of words and wits, we finally devised a plan. We went to Walmart Trademark and got a couple of shirts. Tim Walters got a Chucky trademark shirt. I got a Killer Clowns from Outer Space trademark shirt, and Sparky got a Thithing trademark shirt. We put on the shirts and started to act really superior about our film knowledge, thanks to Sparky, LOL. Sparky looked at us with a proud smile. We were ready to infiltrate the base as one of their own. We all knew the consequences if we failed. We could die, or worse, everyone else, and us could die. We walked to the skyscraper. I could feel it looming over us. Tim Walters put on brass knuckles. Sparky put a spear in his backpack, and I tucked a squirt gun in my back pocket. With the glass giant looking over us, I looked at Sparky and Walters. We gave each other a silent nod. We didn't know what we were going to find, but we would stop it or die trying. I finally spoke up and said in a serious tone, Sparky, it's go time. We sauntered into the skyscraper, and were all amazed. Everyone was wearing horror movie shirts and laughing with glee. If you didn't know it was a cult, you'd want to join in too. I saw rooms where they were watching Day of the Dead. I saw co-workers laughing and talking with genuine joy. I walked a little further down the main lobby, and I saw a smoothie bar with an energetic bartender, happily mixing drinks and doing little tricks. The patrons all clapped and cheered. I was so confused. It looked like one of those tech companies with childlike furniture, beanbags, arcade machines, smoothie bars. It was a paradise. Something was sorta off. I swear I could hear whispers around me. I could feel their gaze on my back. Sparky commented, I think they know we're outsiders. They're acting like they're having fun to shoo us away. This is bad. This is very, very bad. They all had this fixed smile. At first I thought they were having fun, but now, it's just a never-ending smile. It just wouldn't drop. They wouldn't blink. It's almost as if they were aliens pretending to be human. I whispered to the gang, "That's what I call us now. Let's just speed this up before they get aggressive, but act like we still think it's a paradise." I spotted an elevator, and we all huddled inside, pretending to look amazed as we stepped inside the metal box. Our look of amazement quickly dropped as the doors closed, and we could get some privacy. I was freaking out, and so was the gang. We got our wits about us and decided to go to the top floor, because that's where the LVL 99 boss is going to be. Eventually we got to the top floor, floor 99. It was a long elevator ride, because it felt like hours. We stepped out into a long corridor with golden pillars holding the roof up. We walked down the red carpet to a large double door. I drew in a deep breath. This is what we've been waiting for. We don't know what we'll find here, but are ready to find out and fight. We all got into position and pushed the door open. I froze. It was Rover behind a large shiny desk. It looked like a palace. Big windows and a couple of naked ladies who were feeding him grapes. A name tag sat on the front of the desk. It read, "The boss. Well, I've been expecting you," Rover said. I lost control of my emotions and screamed, "You stole my toaster." I tried to charge, but my new family held me back as I thrashed against them, wanting to rip apart my tormentor. "I fucking loved you, Rover. The good and the bad. I loved all of you. How could you do this to me? How could you do this to us?" Rover smiled and sat up in his chair. "I need to summon the true one. He has been waiting for years, whispering in my ear. He told me I needed to start this all. He told me what awaits beyond what you can see. He is sleeping right now. We need to summon him in his birthplace. I can't afford you to ruin this for us." He gave a dismissing handwave and pressed a huge red button on his desk. It made a loud buzzer noise. Guards with spears all filed into the room in a hurry. They all looked mad and angry and mean. We put our hands up and they stayed up. We were huddled in the elevator and taken to the bottom floor. The bottom floor was small and had a cage in the middle. God only knows what they want to do with us. That's the end of this story for now. I will keep you updated if something develops. The road spoke to me. There's something about being on the open road that just seems to exemplify the concept of freedom itself. When you're riding down an endless stretch of highway with nothing but your thoughts to keep you company, you feel like you can really think. It's not like the rare quiet moments you get in everyday life. It's more prolonged and profound. Maybe that's why I decided to get in my car and drive 3 days ago. I had been going down the highway for a long time, only stopping for gas and bathroom breaks. When I finally decided food was necessary as well, it was the dead of night, so there weren't many options. But I finally found a Waffle House sitting conveniently next to the highway. I headed in, being greeted by warm air and the smell of coffee. I sat down and waited for the waitress to come over and acknowledge me. She was in her 30s, I think, with long brown hair and a bright smile that cut across the room. She flashed that smile in my direction to let me know she was on her way as she finished up with the elderly couple she was helping. It wasn't long before she was handing me a menu that I didn't need to see. "Hey there, honey. What are you having?" she asked me, each word seeming to drip sweetness. Coffee, please," I muttered. I've never been a very social person, and when it comes to the art of conversation, I'm not much of an aficionado. Still, she either didn't notice, or was too polite to let on that she did. "That's no problem. I'll have it out in just a moment." "So where you headed?" she said, while retrieving a cup and a pot of coffee from the counter. "I'm just headed out west for now," I replied, not knowing quite how to answer that question. "I thought you were going to say you were headed out to the mountain top," she laughed. "There is a mountain out this way." "No, not a real mountain. That's just the name of place. They call it the mountain top, because people go there to talk to God." She poured a cup of coffee, and I took a long sip before continuing. "They go there to talk to God?" "Something like that. I've never been, myself, but people are headed up there all the time." "Sounds kind of crazy, you know?" "Maybe, but people head up there all the time anyways." I looked over at the elderly couple sitting on the other side of the diner. "What about them? Are they headed to the mountain top?" "Yep, like I said, every headed down this road is usually going there. You might be one of the first people I've ever seen that isn't," she said, her big smile starting to unnerve me a little. "Well, I've never even heard of the place," I told her, taking another drink of the coffee. you have now. Sugar. The mountaintop is just about a day's ride out further west. You'll probably pass it. Lord knows you can't miss all the signs they have pointing it out. I shrugged and fell into the silence I had become so accustomed to as of late. Talking felt like it took more energy than it used to, and I wanted to save every bit of it for the road ahead. I thought that would be the end of it, but she said one more thing to me when I went to pay the check. Thanks for dropping in. You should go to the mountaintop. I think it's where you need to be right now. I didn't respond, just gave a shy smile and walked out to my car. The way she had insisted didn't sit right with me. I was more determined than ever to drive right past that place and hoped this would be the last I heard of it. If only it had been that easy. I got back in my car and flicked on the radio, hoping something other than droning of my engine and tires would aid in keeping me awake and alert. There wasn't much out here in the way of radio stations, mostly gospel music and a classical station. However, there was one that came through clear of a man who spoke in a low but kindly voice. Hey there, all you weary travelers. I'll be taking calls for the next few minutes to answer any questions you may have. Go ahead, caller. You're on the air. Hello? Came the elderly voice of a woman. Yes, ma'am. Go ahead with your question. Yes, I'm headed to the mountaintop right now and just wanted to know if I needed to bring anything along. The radio DJ laughed a little. No, all you need is your questions. Questions and a little bit of faith. Go ahead. Next caller, you're on. The next voice was a young woman. Hi, Nate. I was just wondering about the trials. What happens if we fail? Don't worry, we all fail. The only trial that really matters is how determined you are to keep trying. Let's take one more. You're on with Nate. Go ahead. This last one was a man's voice. He sounded tired. Yay. What would you say to a doubter, like someone who doesn't want to go to the mountaintop even though it's calling them? Nate sighed heavily through the microphone. If they called, it doesn't matter. They'll end up there one way or another. Okay, that's enough questions for now. Before we go to some music, we have a special message for Moses Pearson. I almost slammed on the brakes when I heard my name being spoken over the radio. Moses, I know you're listening right now. You need to know that the mountaintop is calling you. The next few days are going to be pretty intense for you. You got to let go and go with it. You're not meant to get to the place you're going. You're meant to get to the mountaintop. Happy trails, friend. You're meant to get to the mountaintop. Maybe it was meant for someone else with my same name. There was probably a perfectly reasonable explanation for it, like the waitress calling up the radio after seeing me in the Waffle House. No, that couldn't be it. I'd never told her my name. Regardless, I was certain this was all some kind of trick, an elaborate hoax to play on unsuspecting tourists. Either way, I wasn't going to the mountaintop. I kept driving for quite a while after that. Maybe 2 or 3 hours. My eyes were getting heavy and fatigue was starting to set in. I knew I'd have to pull over to sleep soon, whether I wanted to keep going or not. Thankfully, I saw a sign for a motel rearing over the highway in the distance. The Midian Inn, exit in 4 miles. I had been anticipating sleeping in my car that evening, so I was pretty relieved to see another option, all the way out here. I pulled off the highway when I reached the exit and drove up the only building for miles around. There was a sign with the words Midian Inn standing next to the little drive way up to the office area. I parked and approached, spying an old man sitting behind a pane of glass at the front area. He had been reading a book as I approached, but put it down when he saw me. Good evening, mister. He greeted me once I was within earshot. I take it you'll be wanting a room? Yay, I just need 1 bed. It's just me. We can do that. I paid the man and he handed me a key with a tag attached that displayed the room number 215. Okay, checkout is at 11 in the morning tomorrow. Make sure to get something to eat when you wake up. It'll be your last chance before doing the first trial. First trial? I asked, getting a sinking feeling in my stomach as he smiled. The first trial of the mountaintop. That's where you're headed, isn't it? No, I'm just passing through, I said, swallowing my irritation. My apologies, mister. Where are you headed? If you're not going there. I'm headed to Corpus Christi, in Texas. For some reason, my GPS picked this route, so this is the way I'm headed. That's awful strange, but the highway will lead there eventually, if that's where you want to go. I was about to turn to walk away, but stopped and asked the question I had been trying to push down the whole time. What is the mountaintop anyways? Depends on who you ask. Some people think they can go there to talk to God. Others think that it's a pilgrimage site or something. Over the years, I've arrived at the conclusion that it's different things to different people at different times. You mean you've never been? Oh, I've been a few times, but it was different each time. The first time I went, it was just a section of forest with nothing there but a hot spring. The second time, it was some kind of church. The last time I went there was to scatter my wife's ashes. It was a graveyard that time. I don't know if they change location every so often or something. The road leading up to it has so many twists and turns that it's hard to remember if it's in the same place or not. Well, I'm not headed that way. I'm just trying to get to Corpus Christi. Still, it does sound interesting. The old man smiled and went back to his book, giving me the cue to head to my room. I opened the door and looked around at the hotel room, which seemed to have been a snapshot of the early 80s. The decor was dated, and the carpet was shaggy, making me feel a little nostalgic as I kicked off my shoes and settled into the bed. I knew sleep would come pretty quickly, so I didn't bother taking a shower. I'd save that for the morning. That night, I dreamed about my wife. In my dream, she was sitting next to the bed, leaning over me and brushing my hair out of my face. She didn't say anything, just smiled at me reassuringly. She leaned in and kissed my forehead just as I woke up. I took a shower and got dressed. I was anxious to be back on the road and didn't want to waste any time, so I immediately went to go check out. I walked to the little office area and was surprised to see the same old man that I had checked in with last night. I figured it would have been someone else in the morning, but he was smiling at me as I approached. "Sleep well?" he asked, as I slid him back the key. "Yay, I think I'm ready to get back on the road now." "You still think you're going to Corpus Christi?" he asked, making me feel a little uneasy. "Yay, that's still my destination," I answered with a nervous laugh. "Yeah, Jonah thought he was going to go somewhere too. That was before the whale got him." The old man responded with a smile. "What do you mean?" I asked. "I mean you have a good trip, Moses." "How do you know my name?" I responded, anger creeping into my voice. "You've been called," was the only thing he said, before looking down to his book, which I could see was a copy of Moby Dick. I probably should have asked more questions in that moment, but instead, I walked away. I was anxious to get away from this place quickly, unable to shake the feeling that I was in some kind of danger. The sooner I saw the mountaintop disappearing into my rear view, the better. As the Midian Inn disappeared behind me, I thought about how the old man had learned my name and decided he probably saw my ID in my wallet when I went to pay him last night. Another happenstance that can be completely explained away with rationality. It's such a shame that I didn't accept that. The whole thing just felt off, like some massive cult was documenting my movements and keeping tabs on me. Either way, it was nothing distance couldn't solve, so I set myself to putting as much distance between myself and all this as I could. The minutes crept by as the sound of my tires spinning on the road became the only thing I could hear. I had been struggling with the urge to turn on my radio again, simultaneously worried that I'd hear the DJ speaking to me again, and curious of what this was all really about. Eventually, I gave in to curiosity and turned the dial. "This is Nate saying good morning to all you listeners from the mountain top. We're going to take some calls before going back to the music. Caller, you're on the air with Nate." "Hi, Nate," came a young lady's voice, bubbly and full of excitement. "I just wanted to say that I just left the mountaintop and it was amazing. What happens if someone is called there and doesn't go?" "Good question, ma'am. It doesn't matter if someone wants to go or not when they're called. They'll end up there one way or another. The mountaintop isn't something you can just ignore. After all." "Next caller, you're on." "Hey, Nate? What is the mountaintop anyways?" came the voice of a young man. "The mountaintop is something that's hard to explain, but I'll do my best. It's where God touches creation. We're all sinners and we're all lost, but he guides us back to the path, and the mountaintop is like the part of a compass that faces north." "Next caller, go ahead." "Hey, Nate. I just wanted to send a shout out to Moses. He's on his way to the mountaintop right now. Even though I think he's going to try to run, do you think you can give him some words of encouragement?" I recognized that voice. It was the old man from the inn. "Moses, I know you're listening. You're headed down the highway right now, probably scared and confused. All the answers you need are waiting for you at the mountaintop. Be not afraid." "You know who said that?" Gabriel when he told Mary Jesus was on his way. He told that to Joseph when he feared to take Mary for his wife. He said it to Paul when he feared he'd be shipwrecked. Well, Moses, keep your eyes and ears open, because Gabriel is going to say it to you. Be not afraid. As if on cue, I saw a large billboard rising over the road, a plain white rectangle with large black words printed across it. Be not afraid. I slammed down on the gas, my heart racing. Despite the commandment of the billboard, I don't think I've ever been more terrified in my life. I sped along, the radio switching for speech to the sounds of smooth jazz. I didn't have an explanation for what was happening, and I didn't try to rationalize it anymore. I just knew I wanted to run as fast as I could to get the hell out here. It was another hour or two down the road that I saw the large sign telling me that the next exit would lead me to the first trial of the mountaintop. For some reason, I just knew that if I blew past that exit, I'd be home free. So I pressed down on the accelerator, my car jumping forward as it gained speed. I glanced at the speedometer and saw I was going over 100 miles an hour. The exit blurred past me, and I grinned. I finally felt like I had escaped. That's when I saw something on the road up ahead and slammed on my brakes. Too late. I managed to slow my car down, but I still smashed into the thing going about 40 miles an hour. It was a miracle I wasn't injured, but my car wasn't so lucky. I climbed out and looked at the front, and saw both the front tires has burst and been shredded by the plastic of whatever it was I crashed into. It was something big, a large plastic thing laying in the middle of the highway. I walked around to get a better look at it, and almost fainted when I finally realized what I was laying my eyes on. It was a giant plastic figurine of a whale. I climbed back into my car and cranked it, momentarily determined to drive it on the shredded tires all the way to the next exit. But it sputtered and didn't turn over. I cursed and climbed back out, pulling out my cell phone and noticing I didn't have any signal in the area, so calling a tow truck wasn't going to work. I started walking forward eventually, deciding I'd get to the next exit and call from there. The sun beat down from overhead, drawing beads of precious moisture from my brow and burning my skin. It was a hard journey, but I was determined to get to the next exit and stay away from the mountaintop. I'd walked for 3 hours, the sun arcing along and assaulting me every step of the way. As I saw an exit looming in the distance, however, I felt renewed vigor and picked up my pace. That pace slowed to a halt when I saw the sign over the exit. The mountaintop, first trial. I didn't understand how it could have been possible, but I was looking at the same exit I had just driven past earlier. If I strained my eyes, I could even make out my car still smashed halfway into the plastic whale in the distance. I thought about trying to walk away again, but thirst won out over my desire to flee. I started walking towards the mountaintop. The exit led to a neat little parking lot devoid of cars. I remember getting nervous that there would be no one there, but still took the little dirt road leading into the wooded area ahead. I was thankful for the trees blocking the unforgiving sun as I walked along, giving some respite to my sunburned skin and sweat-drenched body. After walking for a few minutes, I spotted a small, squat wooden building ahead. It looked almost like a cross between a log cabin and a convenience store. I arrived at the entrance and pulled open the door, breathing a sigh of relief as I was greeted by the cold air. I had half expected it to be locked. Inside was even more like a convenience store, with coolers housing drinks and aisles of various goods. However, none of them were familiar to me. There were bags of what I thought were chips labeled manna and bottles of water with brand names Siloam. It was all very strange, as was the young black lady behind the counter. Congratulations on making it through the first trial. She greeted me. What are you talking about?
I asked,
Grabbing a bottle of the water and bringing it to the counter. You made it through the desert. That's the first trial, she explained. I didn't respond, feeling too tired, and pulled out my wallet to pay for the water. Oh, you don't need to pay. That's yours, she said, pushing the bottle towards me. I looked at her warily but unscrewed the lid and drank most of it in several greedy gulps. I've never heard of Siloam water, but I think it was the sweetest water I've ever tasted in my life. You ready for the second trial? She asked, smiling kindly at me. Actually, I just need to use your phone and the number for a towing company. For your car down the road? It's already been picked up and is getting repaired. It will be back here when you're done. That'll be after you reach the mountaintop though. I'm not going. Sugar, you don't have a choice. You've been called. Listen here, you crazy bitch. I'm not going to your stupid clubhouse or whatever it is. She looked completely unfazed by my outburst, which in turn made me feel downright terrified. Look at you, Moses, so quick to get back on that road. Where you headed anyways? What's at the end of that road for you? You think your wife is waiting for you down in Corpus Christi? Her voice was kind and dripping with a tone of sympathy, but her words only served to anger me. Yet, even more than anger, they scared me. Shut up, was all I can manage to say. Get yourself on up the road to the second trial. And sure, they have a phone you can use. I started to turn to head out the door, when she whistled to get my attention, and I turned back, just in time to catch another bottle of water she tossed at me. And while you're at it, Moses, maybe watch your mouth? I didn't respond, and stormed back out the door. The path stretched further along, going a little uphill. I downed the rest of the first bottle, and threw it on the ground. It seemed ridiculous, but if littering was the best revenge I could muster in this moment, then I'd take it. I started walking up the hill, looking for the next building or whatever the hell it was. As I walked, I felt my fear and anger ebb away, being too exhausted from everything happening to maintain such heightened emotions. Instead, I allowed myself to sink into a comfortable misery. The wooded area pressed in from all sides, and as I walked, I spotted what looked like a noose hanging from a tree, then another. Soon I was wading through a sea of them. I should have felt afraid by such threatening imagery, but instead I felt sadness. More sadness than I could possibly put into words. Towards the end of the path was a ladder heading up a tree to one of the nooses, and I thought hard about climbing it. I walked up and rested a hand against the wooden plank nailed there and closed my eyes. Feeling lost, stranger? I jumped and looked behind me to see a man with a thick beard, looking at me with an amused expression. Yay, I'm looking for a phone. The man laughed, a cheerful juxtaposition in the midst of the nooses. Oh Lord, I don't think you'll find a phone up there. Listen, I just want to get out of here. His tone changed from mirth to a hardened seriousness as he eyed me, looking me fully up and down in a way that made me want to squirm. No, you want peace. I opened my mouth to protest, but found myself unable to speak. You want peace, and you won't find that up there either, he said with a wary glance towards the top of the ladder. Where would I find it then? I asked, tears welling in my eyes. You already know. You just need to quit running from it. I closed my eyes, feeling the tears roll down my cheeks as I sucked in a labored breath. I just need to go. I need to get back on the road. You're on it, stranger. You just have to keep walking it. I felt a sudden rush of anger and rounded on him to scream. I wanted to scream that he was a moron. I wanted to hit him with all my strength. I wanted to release all the frustration boiling inside me in that moment. But when I opened my eyes and spun around, he was gone. I looked around, wondering where he had disappeared to, but there was no one there. I did see a path leading deeper into the woods though, and decided to take that. I walked along, leaving the rope-laden trees behind me, and pushed forward. I walked for a long time, eventually seeing the trees thin away as I breached a clearing, then almost fell to my knees. There, in the middle of the clearing, as a hospital bed, I recognized it immediately, having spent enough time beside one. I approached it and collapsed to my knees, burying my face into the linen sheets and stifling a sob. You miss her? I didn't look up, just froze there. The sheets even smelled like her. I felt a hand touch my shoulder, gently resting there as the female voice continued. What do you think she'd say if she knew where you were going? She can't say anything, I responded, lifting my head up a little. She's dead. That's not what I asked you, Moses. Stop running from the answer. Maybe it was the motherly way she spoke to me, but I just couldn't rouse myself into the anger I had felt earlier. Instead, I answered her question. She'd say I was being a fool, that I was being selfish. No, Moses. She'd say that you are loved. And you are. I looked up then, seeing a middle-aged woman with a face full of mercy. She smiled at me and brushed my hair back the same way my wife used to. She'd say she misses you. She'd say you are strong enough to keep going, even if you don't believe it. Most importantly, she'd say she loves you, and always will. I cried, tears rolling down my cheeks, then buried my head into the sheets that smelled of her again. I'm sorry, I muttered. But when I looked up, the woman was gone. The sun was setting, and there was a trail across the clearing that I knew I had to walk. So I got up, my heart still aching, and walked towards it. I didn't have far to walk. Just a little bit ahead was the top of the hill, stones paving the summit in a neat circle. An old-fashioned well stood atop the center, which I approached cautiously. For some reason, the well filled me with a deep sense of foreboding. I was a few feet away from it when a new voice called out to me. "Don't get too close to it, Moses." I turned to see a young man with long hair standing there. He must have been in his mid-20s, his face calm and serene as he strode towards me. "You know, this well usually isn't here. It's usually in a small town on a Midwestern farm, tormenting a family that grows corn there. It's a long story." "Why am I here?" I asked, exhausted. "Because I called you Moses," the young man said, pulling a piece of meat from his pocket and tossing it into the well. "We all face monsters in our lives. Some of those monsters are like this well, something tangible and providing an exterior threat. Most of us will never have to deal with anything like that. Most of us will have to battle interior threats, which are far more dangerous." "Why are you going to Corpus Christi?" "If you are who I think you are, then you already know," I answered, hearing my anger creeping into my voice. "It doesn't work that way. You need to say it." "Why? Why? So you can chastise me? So you can talk me out of it? So you can use my dead wife as a talking point to change my mind?" I screamed, my anger finally boiling over. "No, Moses, so you can hear how horrible it really is." I said nothing. I stared at him in fury, as if he were the avatar of all my problems made manifest. Finally, he spoke to me again. "Say it." Finally, I broke. I wanted to see the ocean. "No, Moses, say it. Say it." He shouted the last two words, making me jump. I wanted to kill myself. I wanted to swim out into the sea until I couldn't make it back to shore and let the waves take me under. Why would you want that? So I could be with her again. I want to die in the place where I met her. It seemed fitting. You thought it would be fitting to taint the single most important place of your relationship with her. I didn't have an answer for that. I didn't want to admit it, but in that moment, I could hear how horrible it sounded. "I'm sorry," I muttered. "Why are you sorry?" he asked, making me look at the ground in shame. "Man, I'm sorry that I wasn't stronger. I'm sorry that I wanted to give up. It's not me you should apologize to. Right now, your son is at home with your mother. What do you think he'd do if he lost both his parents, one right after the other?" The shame burned my eyes, eliciting fresh tears as I fell to my knees. "Do you understand why I called you here now?" "It was never about you, Moses. It was about him, your son. He prayed for you. He prayed to see his father again." I felt my breath catch in my throat as the young man touched my elbow to get my attention. "She loves you. He loves you. You are loved. You are about a day's drive from Corpus Christi. When you get there, you know what you should do and what you shouldn't. Do the right thing." I looked up at him, feeling all my anger and fear and sadness evaporate as he gazed at me, with a serene expression of what I can only describe as forgiveness. "What's the right thing to do?" "You already know, Moses," he whispered, pulling me into an embrace. "Go there and do the right thing." I left soon after that, walking my way back down the hill. The hospital bed and the nooses were both gone, but the little convenience store thing was there. I walked inside and saw the same woman as before, standing behind the counter. She smiled at me as I entered. "Did you find what you were looking for?" she said with a sly grin. "There's no phone up there," I said dumbly. "No, but there was a call waiting for you. I hope you listened." I nodded, walked back out, not knowing what to say. As I stepped out, I saw the empty bottle of water I had tossed on the ground still laying there. I picked it up and threw it away in the little trash can outside the shop and went on my way. I saw my car sitting in the parking area as I approached. The only there, it looked as if it had never been damaged at all. I got in and turned the key, seeing that it had been filled with gas as well. Sitting on the passenger seat was an envelope that I opened, pulling out the handwritten note within. "Your road takes you to the ocean, but it doesn't end there. Unlike the last Moses I met at the mountaintop, you will see the promised land." I drove down to Corpus Christi, traveling through the small Texas towns and admiring the scenery. Oil rigs and rolling pastures lined the road on either side as the air became fresher. I took the turn headed into Corpus Christi and drove until I was parked beside a bay. There's a little gazebo-like structure there with a plaque about General Travis that overlooks the beach. I met my wife there a long time ago. I pulled the crisp air of the sea into my lungs and steeled myself as I opened the urn I had carried along with me. I kissed it, only hesitating for a moment, before turning it upside down and watching as the wind caught the ashes, pulling them out across the water. I stared for a long time, thinking of her face, memorizing every detail. Then, I turned and walked back to my car. I took another deep breath and started the journey back home to my son. On the way back, I didn't see any signs pointing to the mountaintop. That didn't surprise me. I had already answered the call. It would be somewhere else now, being what was needed for whoever needed it. If you're ever riding down the highway and see signs for the mountaintop, take notice. And if you turn on the radio and hear someone calling you by name to go, be not afraid. Be not afraid. Rattle and silence. The reunion had been long overdue. Old friends, once inseparable, now bound more by nostalgia than time, found themselves together again. The town had changed. New roads, new storefronts, but the past clung to them like dust settling in forgotten corners. They gathered in Daniel's childhood home, a relic of another time, its walls thick with the echoes of their younger selves. Laughter spilled into the night as they recounted stories, each drink loosening memories long buried. Adrian, the skeptic, scoffed at Mark's old superstitions. Liza and Mia reminisced about their games in the woods, and Daniel, the quiet anchor of the group, listened, his eyes distant, weighted by something the others couldn't quite name. Then came the invitation. A letter, unsigned, waiting upon their arrival, simple, almost formal. Come back, one last time. No sender, no explanation, yet an unspoken understanding passed between them. The abandoned house by the cliff, where they had once dared each other to go, where they had whispered ghost stories into the wind, was calling them back. They had all heard the stories. They had all heard the rattle. It had been there in their childhood, an omen before disaster. The sound had come before Daniel nearly drowned in the river, before Liza fell from the old oak tree, before Adrian's father lost control of his car on the rain-slick road. A dry, brittle clatter, like bones knocking together in the wind. They had always thought it was her. Maria. Maria, the twisted ghost, the one they whispered of with shivers down their spines. The wretched thing with broken limbs, hollow eyes, and a mouth stretched wide in eternal agony. The one who lurked in the corners of the house on the cliff. The one who rattled in the night. They had always run. They had always feared, and yet they had survived. Now, they walked toward the house, emboldened by time and bravado. The skeleton of its former self stood frail against the night, its frame groaning under unseen weight. Candlelight flickered through the broken windows, casting shadows that stretched too far, too thin. Then, the air thickened, the laughter died. The rattle. It started soft, a whisper of dry bones. Then it grew, curling around them, threading through their ribs, latching onto their breath. And then, she emerged, bony limbs, contorted and wrong, empty sockets where eyes should be, a mouth gaping in a soundless wail. Maria clawed at the floor, jerky, unnatural, her decayed form writhing toward them. The scent of rot thickened the air. Hold it, Daniel barked. Mark's hands trembled around a talisman. Lissa's grip on the rope tightened. Adrian, forever the doubter, stood frozen, and Mia did not move at all. The ritual began, words tumbling from their lips, half-remembered incantations born from childhood dares and desperate faith. Maria shrieked, her form flickering between this world and the next. Then, with a final tortured wail, she collapsed into the wooden box. The sigils glowed red-hot, then cooled into silence. They had done it. Relief surged through them. The house no longer felt like it was breathing. The shadows receded. They had won. And in the doorway, watching with mournful eyes, stood another figure, one far less monstrous, far more human. She lingered only a moment before fading into nothing. The bus ride home was loud with victory, a barrier of noise against the lingering unease. They had won. They had beaten her. Then Mia spoke. You sealed the wrong ghost. The words were a knife in the dark. Laughter died. Heads turned. Confusion deepened. until they followed Mia's gaze. She wasn't looking at them. She was looking at her son, a frail boy, legs thin from polio, eyes vast with something ancient. And then the past bled through, slow and awful, unraveling like an old wound. Mara and Maria. Two sisters, one beautiful, envied by all, the other burned, disfigured, yet kind. Maria had protected the weak, the outcasts, children like Mia's son. But jealousy festered like rot. Mara, the beautiful one, had bound her crippled sister, tied her with rope, and cast her from the cliff. But the rope had caught on something, and as Maria fell, she was yanked along, her own cruelty dragging her into the abyss. Maria, the so-called monster, had never been the threat. She had been the guardian. And now, she was gone. The bus lights flickered. Then came the silence. No Rattle. No more Maria. For the first time in their lives, there was no dry clatter of bones, no brittle warning threading through the air. The absence of sound settled heavy in their chests, sinking into their bones like cold water. Mia's breath hitched. Her fingers dug into the seat. Her voice, when it came, was little more than a trembling whisper. "She's gone." Her lips parted, forming the words like a prayer. Her hands trembled as realization seeped into her bones, turning her breath shallow, her throat tight. Maria's gone. Now, who will stop her? A soft, breathy chuckle curled through the air. The bus jerked. Wind howled outside, but it wasn't the wind that made the trees groan. The road ahead twisted, stretched, became something else. The lights flickered again, dimming into an unnatural hush. Then, the bus doors swung open. Cold air rushed in, thick with the scent of earth, and something else, something foul. Dark trees, wind shrieking through the ravine, rocks tumbling down into nothingness. They were back at the cliff. The silence stretched. Then Adrian gasped. He was staring, not at the window, not at the road, at the seat beside him. A woman sat there. Not Maria. Mara. Her lips curled. Her eyes shimmered like wet ink, dark and endless. She smiled. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice silk and venom entwined. For getting rid of her again. The bus lurched forward. Adrian's breath hitched. Someone whispered a prayer. Then, just as the weight of horror settled over them, Mara turned her head ever so slightly and winked. Then, with a sickening snap of metal and a chorus of screams, they plunged into the dark, and the only sound left was the rattle and silence. The blue butterfly effect. Every city has its tales, whispered in the dark corners of bars or chuckled over under the bright fluorescent globes of high school cafeterias. But it wasn't until my best friend Michael vanished that I truly understood the weight these stories could carry. Michael was not just a photographer and an urban explorer. He was the life of every party. A guy with an infectious laugh and a knack for capturing the unseen. He once told me, laughing as he adjusted his camera, photography is like stealing a moment out of time itself, snagging bits of the present before they slip into memory. It was clever and deep, very much like him. When murals started mysteriously appearing around town overnight, vivid splashes of color depicting everything from sprawling cityscapes to abstract dreams, no one knew who was painting them. They just turned up, as if by magic, each more elaborate than the last. It was inevitable that Michael, ever curious and drawn to the unknown, would be captivated by them. But it was one mural in particular that caught his obsession, a scene of a dark forest, pierced by rays of light, each ray guiding a vivid blue butterfly deeper into the woods. He called me one evening, his voice alive with excitement. "Alex, you've got to see this," he said. "It's not just art, it's like it's calling to me." He sent me a photo of the mural. "I'm going to follow where they lead," he texted after. That was the last I heard from him. Days turned into weeks with no word from Michael. His apartment was just as he had left it, his camera missing, but his belongings untouched. The police were baffled, but not particularly concerned. Probably just took off on a whim, they suggested. But I knew better. Michael wouldn't just disappear. Not like this. Determined to find some clue, I revisited the mural. It was in an alley off one of the main streets, the blue butterflies almost glowing in the twilight. That's when I noticed something new, a barely visible trail painted in the lower corner of the mural, winding deeper into the depicted woods. It hadn't been there before, had it? Days spent scouring city records and online forums led me to discover 2 more murals, each with the same blue butterflies. The second was on the side of an old warehouse, showing a figure that bore a striking resemblance to Michael, walking deeper into a similar forest. The third, found just inside a railway tunnel, was more disturbing. A group of faceless figures stood at the edge of the forest, surrounded by those same butterflies. The locals had started to notice too. Whispers of the blue butterfly trail began to surface. A path, they said, that once you followed, you never returned. Some spoke of loved ones who had gone missing after seeking out the murals. Others laughed it off as an urban myth, but with each passing day the stories grew, morphing into warnings. Driven by a mix of fear and desperation, I decided to follow the trail myself. Armed with nothing but a flashlight and Michael's last known coordinates, I headed to the forest just as the sun began to set. The air was thick with the scent of pine and earth, the path unclear, but somehow beckoning. As I walked, a single blue butterfly appeared. It fluttered ahead of me, pausing as if to wait whenever I slowed. The deeper into the forest I went, the more butterflies appeared, their wings a stark contrast against the darkening woods. They led me to a clearing, where the trees parted to reveal a strange structure at the center. A colossal, twisted sculpture made of reflective surfaces that fragmented the surrounding wilderness into a dizzying kaleidoscope of colors and shapes. Suddenly, the air turned cold, and a chilling whisper seemed to echo from the trees. "Turn back," it murmured, almost inaudible yet impossible to ignore. Ignoring the warning, I pressed on, driven by a need to find Michael and bring him home. It was here I saw Michael. He was standing motionless before the sculpture, his back to me. As I approached, the crunching of dead leaves underfoot seemed to reverberate through the silence like distant thunder. Slowly, he turned to face me, and the sight stole the warmth from my veins. Michael's eyes, once vibrant and full of life, were now dull and hollow, as if the very essence of his soul had been drained away. His face, pale and gaunt, bore an expression of profound emptiness. It was as though he was looking through me, or perhaps seeing something beyond this world, his gaze fixed on a point far away that only he could discern. His lips parted slightly, as if he were about to speak, but no words came, only a faint, trembling breath that seemed to carry the weight of unspoken horrors. In a voice barely his own, chilling and void of warmth, he whispered, "I thought I was stealing moments out of time. But here, in these woods, the moments steal your soul." His movements were stiff and unnatural, as if each motion was a tremendous effort. The blue butterflies encircled him, their presence eerily synchronous with his shallow, labored breathing. They landed on him gently, their bodies momentarily merging with his, giving him a spectral, otherworldly appearance. Then, as if summoned by some unseen signal, they began to scatter into the sky, their wings catching the last light of dusk, shimmering as they ascended. As the butterflies lifted into the air, Michael's form became increasingly indistinct, blurring with the falling shadows until, all at once, he was gone. All that remained was the echo of his last words, hanging in the chilling air. Horrified yet transfixed, I stood alone in the clearing. The friend I had come to save now vanished, swallowed by the legend of the blue butterfly trail. Who would believe such a story? Reporting it seemed futile. It would only serve to deepen the mystery in my despair. I never went back to that forest. I wrote about it all. Michael's disappearance, the mysterious origin of the murals, the legend that had sprung up around them. The story spread like wildfire, each reader adding their own theories and fears into the mix. The murals remain, their colors vibrant against the concrete and brick of the city. The blue butterflies have become a symbol of the unknown, a reminder of what might lurk just beyond the corner of our eyes. And sometimes, late at night, I hear the faint flutter of wings, the soft rustle of leaves. Every now and then, a lone blue butterfly appears on my windowsill, its wings glinting in the moonlight before it flies off, beckoning me back to the forest. Each time, a part of me yearns to follow, to uncover the truth waiting in those shadows. But then I remember the silence of the woods, the feeling of being watched, and I stay away for now. But the deeper call of the woods, like a siren song, tempts me with its secrets, promising answers that are perhaps best left unspoken. Something from the forest has let itself into my home. I need help. My wife and I, both tired of the frantic pace of life back in the States, decided to move to Scotland 5 months ago. We found a small, weathered farmstead on the edge of a quiet town, the kind of place you see in postcards, rolling hills, fog creeping through the valleys, a patch of forest across the road. Everything seemed perfect at first. The people in town were friendly enough, the kind that wave when you pass them on the road, but there's something off. It's not the kind of thing you notice right away. It's the subtle things, the long drawn-out silences at night, the way the wind sounds different here, like it's carrying whispers. I didn't notice it immediately. I was busy settling in, working on repairs around the property, getting used to the rhythms of the land, but over time, something started to bother me. It crept in, like an itch you can't scratch, until it was too much to ignore. It started with the dreams. At first they seemed harmless, vivid, sure, but harmless. In each one, I was running through the thick, dark forest across the road. My heart would race, and the world around me would pulse with an unnatural rhythm, like the very ground beneath my feet was alive. But then the dreams came more often, night after night. Each time they grew more real, more urgent. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, heart hammering in my chest, only to find myself lying in the same place. I'd fallen asleep, the quiet of the house pressing in around me. One night, I had had enough. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Something was watching. So, I left the warmth of my bed, pulled on my jacket, and went out onto the porch, trying to shake the restless feeling. The cold air hit me like a slap, but I didn't go back inside. I stood there for what felt like hours, staring across the road at the forest, the trees standing like silent sentinels in the moonlight. That's when I saw it. A shape, just beyond the edge of the trees. A shadow that didn't belong. I don't know why I didn't tell Shelley right away. Shelley's my wife, by the way. She already felt so out of place here, so far from home. She'd taken to humming lately, and I feel like it's a nervous tic for her. I didn't want to make things worse for her, especially when I wasn't even sure what I'd seen. At that moment I convinced myself it was nothing. Just the shadows playing tricks. The kind of thing anyone might mistake for a person out of the corner of their eye. But it wasn't like I could just dismiss it either. I mean, the forest across the road isn't exactly close. There's a stretch of yard between the house and the trees, and whatever I'd seen wasn't standing out on the road. It was deeper, further in, beyond the line where the trees start to swallow up the light. I'd also been having those bad dreams, and how could I trust my own eyes when I was barely sleeping, waking up in the middle of the night with my heart pounding? I didn't know what I had seen, but I didn't want to scare Shelley. Not when she already felt so displaced here. She might think I was losing it. But that was the way things were for a week or so. Pretty simple. Shelley and I settled into a routine. I work from home, so my days were spent in front of a screen, responding to emails, writing reports, and the like. Shelley had inherited enough money that, as long as she kept some funds tucked away in index funds and didn't splurge on things we didn't need, we could live comfortably here. The farmstead was quiet, peaceful, even. We had plans. We start small, make some repairs, and maybe get a few animals. The previous owners had goats and sheep, though the enclosures weren't in much better shape than the rest of the property. Most of the posts weren't even in the ground anymore, and a few of the stone fences were buckled and broken. I filled in the gaps where I could, but there was one spot, a stretch of old stone wall, that looked like it had been hit by a car. Still, the place was cheap. I had no complaints. The goal was early retirement, and we were on track. The slow, quiet life was exactly what we had envisioned. Then, something happened to Blair. Blair was a nice enough girl, always smiling when she rode her red bicycle with the little basket in front, straight out of a movie. She lived a few properties down the road, and would pass by each afternoon on her way to work a shift at the local pub on the edge of town. She usually returned just past Shelley and his bedtime, unless she got off early. We'd had our few nights out in town, chatted with her more than once. She was friendly, always waving and ringing her bike's bell as she pedaled by. It's a shame, really, what happened. I remember the last time I saw her. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I'd been working on the gateway to the property when I saw her ride by, her bike against traffic. The bend in the road is wide enough that I never really questioned why she'd ride closest to our home before deciding to switch back to the proper side. She rang her bell, waved, and said, "Hi," without slowing down much. But then I saw something as she pedaled past, something over her shoulder, dangling from a branch. A little pendant made of twigs, twine, and a dried flower. It reminded me of my dreams. I don't know why, but I walked over and took it down. It wasn't even on my property, but it gave me the creeps. A sense of something not right, as if it radiated malice, though I couldn't explain why. That night I was woken by a shriek, piercing, frantic, pulling me from sleep. My heart was racing. I bolted upright, my mind scrambled. I went to the kitchen, stepped toward the window, and looked out. There it was. The silhouette. I didn't go back to sleep. Blair didn't ride by the next afternoon. Or the next. Or the one after that. This didn't sit well with me for the following nights. Daytime felt fine, though it was the kind of fine where you just feel safer when the sun is up and the shadows haven't crept in yet. But eventually the police showed up at our door, asking if we'd seen anything. That was the first time Shelley heard about my dreams, and also the first time I felt the sting of ridicule. The officers pointed and laughed as I told them about the shriek in my dream, how I woke up and saw the silhouette outside through the window. They didn't take me seriously. It sounded valid enough. Blair had lived alone in an apartment, and there was nothing to suggest foul play. She could just packed up and left after her shift, the way some people do when they get the urge to start over. Aside from her boss doing a wellness check, no one else seemed overly concerned. With my suspicions brushed aside, Shelley seemed to relax. We decided to have a drink in Blair's memory, to toast our good neighbor who maybe, possibly, had just run away. I wish I hadn't drunk so much. By the time we got home, I was tipsy enough to stagger, and Shelley was far beyond that. I shouldn't have driven, but aside from my terrible parking job, no real harm was done. We stumbled into the house, too drunk to care about anything else, and fell asleep quickly. But in my dreams, things had changed. The pulsing now danced in red and blue at the edges of my vision, like neon lights flickering in time with my heart. This time, I wasn't in the forest. I walked toward it from my own home. In the distance, a lute played, soft, lilting, and strange, carried on the wind. It wasn't the song itself, but the whistle that followed it, a tuneful, rhythmic whistle that drew me in, like a melody I should know. I reached the road, and that's when I heard it, a woman's giggle, light and playful. I crossed the street, shoving branches aside as I swayed into the forest, even though I'd peered into it countless times. Every time the light seemed to disappear the moment I got close, swallowed up by the trees. But not this time. The moonlight broke through the canopy, and it led me to a circle, a ring of small stones, moss and mushrooms, glowing faintly in the pale light. Inside the circle, a young woman danced, graceful, hypnotic. She seemed so familiar. Shelley. No, it wasn't her. But as I tried to focus on her, my vision blurred, and the figure was shrouded in shadow. And that's when I saw it. A bike. A red bike. Just beyond the woman, leaning against a tree, the same red bike Blair had ridden, the same basket, and the same little bell. My heart pounded. I glanced back at the woman, and the instant my eyes met where hers would have been, something happened. Her neck snapped to an unnatural angle. Her arms dropped to her sides, and her wrists tilted in such a way that her fingers, her nails pointed straight at me, like they were attack vectors, ready to strike. The sound of a lute string snapping echoed in the dream, and that was when my body went into full prey mode. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to escape, but my legs wouldn't move. That was for less than a second. It felt like an eternity, though. I violently pivoted, my body sluggish, weighed down by the alcohol, before I lurched into a drunken sprint. The pulsing in my head grew, as if the rhythm were tearing through the soles of my feet. Thumping echoed behind me. Vibration, branches cracking under the weight of something much bigger than I could imagine. This couldn't be Blair. No, that wasn't her. The figure in the forest, there's no way that was her. I crashed into trees, my shoulders scraping against rough bark. I hadn't wandered this deep into the forest, but I could see it now, the road, just a little further. The thumping grew louder, the air hot and foul, pressing against my back. My skin crawled, my heart hammered, feeling as though it might catch fire from the terror flooding through me. I reached the road, stumbled into the ditch, and collapsed. My knees buckled under me, and the drunkenness I had managed to escape during the sprint came rushing back in full force. I hit the ground face first. But I forced myself onto my back, panic driving me to scramble for some defense, to prepare myself for whatever was chasing me. And that's when I saw it. A little girl, in the tree line, stopped and stared right at me, next to something much larger, the thing I had seen before. But now, next to the girl, it was massive, trollish, ogreish, dark, oppressive shadow cloaked them both. My heart stopped and my vision blackened. And then I woke up. 6 a.m. What a terrible dream. Shelley still looked angelic, lying beside me, sound asleep. I rolled over, desperate to bury myself in the warmth of slumber, finally convinced that I was safe. But then I saw it. Mud. Tracked in through the door. I could see it from the kitchen, all the way up to the bed. My boot prints. My boot prints. Pain shot through my shoulders and my knees ached. My back burned, stiff as a board. Grass stains on my palms. Dirt under my fingernails. Shelley woke up before I could finish cleaning the mess. It didn't take much for her to convince herself that I'd gotten too drunk the night before and stumbled outside before we went to bed. She scolded me, made me promise never to drive in that state again. I nodded, although I hadn't really been listening. Her reasoning seemed sound enough, that in my drunken stupor I must have wandered outside, tracking in mud before collapsing into bed, and maybe she was right. I was well past buzzed, to say the least. But something gnawed at me as I patrolled the yard. The ground around the house was solid, dry, except for the usual morning dew. We hadn't had any storms lately. No rain to soften the dirt into mud. I had reasonable doubt that whatever was smeared across the floor had come from our property. Then there was the gate. Just past the old iron gate at the front of our land, 2 clumps of upturned grass disrupted the otherwise undisturbed earth between the stone fence and the ditch, proof that I'd fallen there. I could picture it too clearly, staggering, breathless, tripping over my own feet, landing hard. But if that was true, how had I made it back inside? And why couldn't I remember getting up? Honey, the pie's ready. Come back inside. What? Even looking back, I can't believe I was so lost in my own head that I hadn't noticed Shelley was baking. I couldn't even tell you how long I'd been pacing outside that day. Rhubarb and juniper pie. If you haven't had it, you should. Back in Pennsylvania, we rarely saw juniper berries in the markets, but here, they were everywhere, growing wild along the trails, sold fresh at every farmer's market. Shelley had taken to them quickly, experimenting in the kitchen, turning them into something sweet, something familiar. The pie didn't make me forget, but for a little while it grounded me. And really, wasn't everything fine? The house was warm. The days passed quietly. Aside from the nightmares, nothing had happened. I told myself that over and over. Shelley was happy. She came home from town in high spirits, chatting about little things. The baker's new scones, the neighbor's new dog. Meanwhile, I had been dampening our home's energy with my suspicions, with my paranoia. Maybe that was all it was, adjusting to a new place. Maybe the tension, the unease, the sense of something lurking. Maybe it was just me. The following days, no dreams, no strange noises, no blare, just wonder. Wonder turned into dismissal, and dismissal turned me toward forgetting it all until this week. My mood had lifted. The nights were silent. The house felt like ours again. I focused on finishing the stone fence out front, salvaging old rocks from a collapsed section of wall deeper in the property. The work was satisfying, almost meditative. With each stone I set in place, it felt like I was putting something behind me, until I found it. I was wedging a large rock into the top of the fence when I heard another stone shift, a dry, scraping sound just a few feet away. I paused, a loose stone, my natural prey. I nudged a few with my boot, and one moved too easily. Loose, smiling to myself, proud of my manly blue-collar senses. Guys who work on computers can be handy too. I pried it free, ready to set it with fresh mortar. And there it was. A small pendant, nestled deep in a pocket between the stones. Twigs twisted together, bound in fraying twine. A dried flower, brittle and colorless, woven into the center, not truly colorless. Rowan, long past its bloom, a cream-white husk of what it had been. This wasn't lost or forgotten. Someone had placed it there. The edges of the stone were too precise, too deliberate. We'd see the raw scrape of metal against rock, pale and dustless. I knew this fence. I had been working on it all day. Nothing kept the weather out, not the damp, not the wind, and yet the hollow where the pendant rested was fresh. If it had been there long, rain and time would have taken their toll. It should have been blackened with rot, disintegrating into the dirt. It wasn't. I reached in. The moment my fingers touched it, the air shifted. A gust of wind swept through, not a natural breeze, but a single deliberate push of air that curled around me, lifting the fine hairs on my arms. I froze. There, riding on the wind, was a sound, a whistle, high and thin, almost tuneful, deliberate, too deliberate. It didn't come from the trees or the distant road. It came from nowhere, from everywhere. Something inside me recoiled. My gut tightened like I'd swallowed ice water. Then, just as fast, my fear burned away, smothered under something hotter. Anger. I was tired of this, tired of the tricks, the whispers in the dark, the things just outside my sightline. Whatever game this was, I was done playing. I didn't take it inside. I wouldn't. Instead, I carried it far out back and threw it, hard, into the underbrush. Let the woods have it. Let whoever put it there come and get it. I could even feel like they were watching, the hairs on the back of my neck raising just for me to pat them back down. I dusted off my hands, turned toward the road, and started walking. I was going to our neighbor's house. I needed answers. By the time I reached the Aikins property, the sun was leaping from its peak, pressing heat into my shoulders, soon to set. Stuart and Elsie were always welcoming. They'd hosted Shelley and me once together, then Shelley plenty more times on her own. My visit was met with the usual warmth, right up until I asked about the Fultons. Which honestly wasn't long past our greetings. I'd planned to ease into it, to start slow and ramp up the questioning, so I wouldn't sound insane. But the moment I mentioned the last family to own my house, the atmosphere shifted, subtle but undeniable. Stuart and Elsie stiffened, their easy smiles tightening. "Well, what do you need to know about them?" Stuart said. "They aren't coming back." What? Elsie shot him a look, then quickly softened her voice. "What Stuart means is, well, there's not much of a legacy to them, and they shouldn't concern you." Not reassuring, not even close. I pressed, "What's that supposed to mean? Are they—" "Yes," Stuart cut in, then hesitated. "Kind of. 1. Isla's been missing. Alexander is most definitely dead." Something heavy settled in my gut. My thoughts scrambled to piece together questions faster than I could ask them. Stuart must have seen it on my face because he exhaled and continued before I could interrupt. "Alex and Isla were good neighbors. A little odd, but happy. Moved in 7 years ago, no fuss. Always friendly, Isla especially. She used to stop by often." His voice softened for a second, like the memory was bittersweet. Things only got strange in the months before Isla disappeared. Elsie folded her hands in her lap. Neither of them looked at me now. "She told us Alex wasn't sleeping." Stuart went on. "Not just trouble sleeping, wasn't sleeping at all. Some nights she'd wake up and he was gone, but he always went to bed with her, always woke up beside her. She thought maybe he was sneaking out because of money trouble. She never got an answer." He rubbed his thumb over the edge of the table, thoughtful. "The week she stopped coming around," he said, "the police visits started." My mouth was dry. "Alex was clean," Stuart said. "Not a single person believed he hurt her. You have to understand. He wouldn't. They weren't just some new couple who moved in. They grew up here. Childhood sweethearts. That house was their first home together." Stuart exhaled sharply, then stood and walked to the far window. He pulled back the curtain, revealing a small familiar shape tucked on the sill. A pendant. Twigs, twine, and a dried rowan flower. "The same damn thing I found in my fence." "Wards," Stuart said. He picked it up, rolling it between his fingers. "Alex gave us a bunch of them, told us to tuck them around our homes. Said the forest took Isla, said it took his wife. And before he left, he told us to keep the wards up. My skin prickled. Left? I asked. Stuart's fingers went still against the twine. He said he was going to get her. He placed the ward back on the sill, then crossed the room to another window. This time he pulled the curtain back and gestured outside. Last time we saw him, he said, nodding toward the bend in the road near my house, was that night. I stepped closer and followed his gaze. A couple 100 yards away, just past the curve, lay the tree line, the forest's edge, dark even now, with the noon sun glaring overhead. The wind barely stirred the branches. It was clear that night. Stuart continued, voice quieter now. No moon, no clouds, just stars. He exhaled through his nose. We watched him walk in right there, lantern in hand. Never saw him come back out. Something inside me sank. They found him the next week. Stuart finally said his parents went to check on him. Guess through everything, he'd never missed his Wednesday call with his Mao. He let out a slow, weighted breath. Coroner said, heart attack, but he was in his bed, on his side of the bed, looking up at the ceiling, arms at his sides, fully dressed, mud on his boots. I swallowed. We keep the wards up, Stuart said, voice low. He looked down at the one in his palm, frowning. Just in case. Stuart opened his mouth to say more, but I cut him off. I shouldn't have even let him speak as long as he had, not after realizing what I'd done, what I'd taken down. The wards. They had been separating my house, my wife, from whatever was in the forest.
My stomach clenched. I need to leave. Now, please, can I have one of those wards?
Elsie looked like she was about to protest, lips parting with the kind of words people say to reassure themselves more than anyone else. That I wouldn't need it. That Alex had lost his mind. That it was just a story. Just superstition. But Stuart knew. He raised a hand, silencing her before a single syllable could escape. His expression was unreadable, but there was something in the way his gaze lingered on me. A weight, a quiet understanding, like he had been waiting for this. With a small nod of his head, he gestured toward a drawer. Elsie hesitated, then opened it. Inside, lying in a thin layer of dust, were 3 more of those brittle little charms, twigs bound in knotted twine, flowers long dead. They must have been sitting, forgotten yet deliberately kept. I didn't wait. I grabbed them and turned for the door, my pulse a dull roar in my ears. I had to get home. I had to get them back up, before sunset. As I stepped off the porch, I heard it. The soft, deliberate click of the Aikins' door latching shut. And then, the lock turning. I must have looked like a madman, sprinting straight for the house. I didn't care. I needed time. As much as I could steal before the light bled from the sky and darkness took its place. Cutting through the yard, my breath ragged, I caught movement, a figure in the window. Shelley. She passed by the bedroom window upstairs, the soft glow of the lamp outlining her familiar shape as the sun began to lower itself beneath the other side of our home. Relief crashed over me so hard, I nearly stumbled. She was safe. Here, home, unaware of the wards I had torn down. Unaware of what I had let in. But relief was fleeting. Urgency took its place. I didn't slow down. I couldn't. I barreled through the front door, barely remembering to close it behind me before rushing to the windows. One by one, I placed the wards, my hands shaking as I set them on the sills. They felt too small, too fragile. Would they even be enough? Above me, Shelley moved across the floorboards, the creak of her steps steady and light, humming a tune I almost recognized. Familiar, reassuring. But there was one more ward. I had to find it. Without stopping to catch my breath, I tore back outside, the last remnants of daylight stretching long and thin over the grass. The sun was almost gone. I ran to the back, to where I had thrown it. I found it faster than I expected, almost as if it had been waiting for me. Snatching it from the grass, I didn't hesitate. I sprinted back, my pulse hammering in my ears. The sky had darkened just that much more, shadows stretching and swallowing the last light. I nearly slammed into the front door as I stumbled inside and closed it behind me, heart still pounding. I recouped for 30 seconds or so, catching my breath. And then, the handle turned. The front door creaked open a few moments later, and there was Shelley, standing in the doorway, holding a little woven basket full of juniper berries. Her face was flushed from the cold, strands of hair falling loose around her cheeks. I shoved the ward into my pocket, forcing my breath to steady. She giggled. "Well, what had you running like that, you goof?" Her smile was warm, teasing. "Couldn't even hold the door for your wife." "One." I blinked. She wasn't home. "I thought you'd been inside," I said quickly, covering the rush of unease creeping up my spine. "That's my bad, darling." I pulled her into a hug, burying my face in the warmth of her neck, breathing her in. She smelled earthy, crisp, with the faint bite of juniper. She leaned back slightly, brushing her fingers through my hair. "I told you I was going out to pick berries today. Didn't I do good?" Her voice was soft, sweet, but something about the way she said it made my stomach twist. I had heard her upstairs, humming, walking, moving through the house. I swallowed hard, tightening my arms around her just a little. "You did so good, honey." I forced myself to let go, forced myself to act normal. "Be right back," I murmured, stepping away. I slipped around the corner, pulling the ward from my pocket. Like a burglar, I crept up the stairs, my pulse in my throat, holding the ward out in front of me. Like some kind of idiot, I swept each room as if I were clearing a house in a war zone. Nothing. Closet, clear. Bathroom, clear. Hallway, clear. My muscles loosened, but only slightly. Then, from downstairs, "Honey, are you done hiding from your wife now?" Her voice was sing-song, playful. I exhaled, forcing the tension from my body. "Yes, I am." I ducked into our bedroom, knelt down, and slipped the final ward under the bed, right beneath her side. Extra protection. The rest of the evening passed peacefully. We curled up together on the couch, watching Bob's Burgers while the rich, earthy scent of juniper pie filled the house. That should have been the end of it. But I wouldn't be writing this now if not for the dream. It started with me waking up, sitting straight up in bed. The sheets beside me were cold, empty. A giggle drifted through the room, soft, familiar, wrong. My head snapped toward the door just in time to see Shelley's bare feet disappear around the frame. Jolted, I threw the covers off and followed. The wooden floor was cold against my feet as I stepped into the hall, catching the faintest sound, their feet slapping softly against the stairs. She was heading down. I reached the landing just as the front door groaned open. I rushed to pull my shoes on, the laces tangling under trembling fingers. When I finally looked up, she was already outside, skipping, dancing, drifting, straight toward the trees. The moment I crossed the threshold, the dream shifted. The moonlight dimmed. The sky felt too low. My vision tunneled, narrowing toward the trees as though the house behind me no longer existed. The closer I got to the woods, the louder her humming became. And then, the lute. A melody, plucked softly from the shadows, rising to meet her song. I stepped past the brush, and there it was. A small ring of stones, moss, and mushrooms, glowing faintly in the pale light. My stomach turned to ice. At its center sat a juniper shrub, half picked clean. A string on the lute snapped with a sharp, jarring twang. And I woke up, next to no one. The bed was empty. The house was silent. I rushed downstairs, my pulse still hammering from the dream. And there, on the kitchen table, was a note. "Went to drop off the pie at Stu and Elsie's. They'll be back around noon, baby. Signed, Shelley." That's not right. That's not right. She doesn't spell her name like that. A slow, creeping chill spread through my chest. I turned the paper over in my hands, searching for anything else, something to explain why my skin was crawling. But the handwriting was perfect. Too perfect. Like it was trying to be natural, trying to be her. I swallowed hard and turned on my heel, bolting back up the stairs. I dropped onto my hands and knees beside the bed, heart in my throat. I lifted the bed skirt. The ward was gone. A sharp wave of nausea rolled through me. My mouth was dry, my hands clammy as I pressed my palm to the floorboards, scanning for something, anything. And then I saw it. Faint, nearly invisible against the wood. The smallest outline of a footprint. Dry mud, barely more than a smudge, as if someone had carefully wiped it away. Almost perfectly. She almost had me. It's 10 a.m. right now. I need ideas, guys. What do I do? The day the wind came. Gather around. Listen to me. Every once in a while, on the day of the blue moon, the wind will come. You can tell when the wind is coming because the air smells like cranberries and a part of the sky turns lime green. The wind is not like the lovely breeze that flutters your hair, nor is it the cold chill of a day in the snow. It does not blow bubbles, and it does not move the leaves. It is hard to explain the wind. My grandmother was the one who explained it to me, and her parents are the ones who explained it to her. Would you like me to tell you her story? Of course. Come close. My grandmother was your age when her first wind blew. She grew up in a town on a beach with sand that glittered like diamonds and where the air was warm and smelled of salt. She was out on her farm with her family when a part of the sky suddenly turned lime green, like the color of the lime popsicles. Her baba suddenly picked her up and carried her quickly towards the house. They left all their things behind. Her teta quickly opened the door and let them inside. My grandmother's mama and baba were quick to spring to action. Her baba began covering the windows with papers and tape. Her mama started making walls out of the furniture, like stacking Legos one atop the other. My grandmother's teta returned to her bed in the corner of the room and proceeded to take a nap. While they worked, my grandmother asked her parents questions about the wind. She asked what it sounded like. Her baba explained how the wind made sounds that were loud and confusing. He told her it could sound like the time mama dropped her glass and the pieces shattered like diamonds across the kitchen floor. Or it could make sounds like the fireworks during the festival that shot into the sky and looked like blooming flowers. Her baba explained to her that the wind could whisper. It could even talk. It could sound like anyone. A friend asking for something. Someone saying they want to help. Screams. And that it was very, very important to never speak to the voices. My grandmother asked her baba why. Her baba explained that the wind could take her voice if it hears her speak. Usually it only lasts a few days, like when her baba lost his voice because he had been coughing for a long time, even when her mama made his tea with honey. Her baba explained that sometimes, if you are too young or have a sore throat, and especially when the air smells like cranberries, the wind could take someone's voice forever. Do you smell that? It's cranberries. My grandmother touched her throat and thought about never singing again, never telling her teta she loved her, never telling anyone anything again. She wondered if she would be lonely without a voice. My grandmother asked her mama why she was putting their shoes under the door. Her mama explained how the wind moved quietly and could creep underneath. She explained that it was very, very important to keep the door closed and stay far away from it, because the wind could open doors. My grandmother asked her mama how the wind could open doors. Her mama explained that the wind could pretend to be a person, that it could look like anyone or anything, that it wasn't real, but it could look more real than anything. Her mama explained that if the wind opens the door, it is very, very important to close her eyes immediately. My grandmother asked her mama why. Her mama explained that if she looked at the wind for more than a few seconds, it would take her eyes. My grandmother touched her eyes and thought about what it would be like to never see her mama's face. To never watch her baba fish for mullet out on the sea, or watch the fish rise up like jewels from the water. To never see the birds on the olive trees outside their home. To never see the spices and colorful arrays of food at the market when she goes shopping with her mama. She wondered if she would be sad without her sight. Her mama and her baba finished their tasks of building walls and securing shoes. Her baba picked her up in his arms once more. They went to the bed where her teta was napping, and all of them got under the covers and cuddled. Gather close. My grandmother thought about the rules her parents had taught her. Never respond to the voices, even if they sound friendly. Never make a sound, because the wind could steal her voice. Never look at the wind, no matter how much she might want to. She wanted to see her family's faces more. It's okay, She heard the noises and the voices, the screams. She stayed quiet with her eyes shut tight, even when there was a confusing noise that scared her, and she really wanted to cry. She was quiet, just like that. Good job, guys. Tears came out, and the rough thumb of her baba wiped them gently. He whispered to her so softly that she almost couldn't hear it. He explained that it was just the wind, and it's not real. For a moment she was shocked that her baba talked. But then she remembered that he was old, and the wind took young or sick voices, not old voices. Yes, I am very old. Shh. She snuggled into her barber's chest with her mama hugging her from behind, and fell asleep, silent, safe, with her eyes shut tight. It's okay. Shh. Shut your eyes, friends. It's okay. It's just the wind. It's not real. It's not. Take the next right and feed me. On the preceding crossroad, turn left. My GPS guide monotonously relayed to me as I hazardously drove my Honda Civic down the narrow and pitch-black roads of Swan Vale, a vast woodland town, located up in the mountains of northeastern Pennsylvania. As my engine puttered and my tires squeaked, I tried my best to scan the road ahead of me to spot the crossroad in advance, to which I barely could, thanks to the branches that stretched high above the road and shielded the tarmac from moonlight. My saving grace was my crappy headlights that barely illuminated the forthcoming track. I did as my GPS requested, and once I completed the turn, I could hear a headache revving up in my head as I was greeted with yet another long, tight roadway with seemingly no end. I grit my teeth and let out his of pent-up frustration, tightening my grip on the steering wheel as I begrudgingly awaited the GPS to inform me of which turn to make next. I hated these roads with a burning passion, yet I sadly had to put up with them. If I wanted to continue visiting my daughter, she and her husband moved to Swan Vale a year ago to start a family, and ever since then I've been visiting at least once a week. It isn't an easy task. It's about a 5-hour drive to get there and back from where I live. And I'm an old man. Yet despite that, I always make it a point to visit, regardless of how long it takes. 2 months ago, my daughter gave birth to a young healthy girl, and so I'd been visiting more frequently. And thus, I had to encounter Swan Vale's road network more frequently. The roads that lead in and out of Swan Vale may have well been designed by the devil himself. That may sound melodramatic, but I wholeheartedly believe whoever designed the road network designed it with the pure intent of inflicting psychological torment on those who drive it. The roads are fine during the day when the sun hangs in the sky, but when night falls and I'm attempting to leave town, that's when the roads become my personal hell. Up is down, right is up, down is left. My mind is swept up in the jumble that is the intertwining and identical roads of Swan Vale's road network, until eventually it's morning, and only then do I find my way out. So, much to the encouragement of my daughter, I ordered myself a GPS. I left the responsibility of leading me out of town to it, and for the first 2 weeks, they were like a gift from God. No more did I spend entire nights circling the outer woods of Swan Vale with no sense of direction. Instead, I was now managing to leave the town in a matter of minutes with the help of the GPS mapping function and directions. Soon, I found myself fully relying on it and trusting its every word. Until that night. On the preceding crossroad, continue straight. I'd been driving for 2 hours, and irritation was beginning to spike in me, as an exit was still nowhere in sight. Unusual for my beloved GPS, to the point I began to believe it was busted, but upon examining it, it seemed to be functioning well. I then considered the possibility that maybe it had mistakenly taken a longer route, but as the roads grew narrower, and my surroundings became more darker than I thought possible, I soon concluded that it was leading me further into the forest than away from it. On the preceding crossroad, turn right. I sighed and began to slowly spin my steering wheel to the right. I was almost at my wit's end and contemplating whether to just head back and find my own way out, when I soon found out that the GPS's instruction hadn't ended yet. Crackling through the GPS speaker came a deep, hushed voice unlike its usual robotic one. And feed me. I slammed the brakes instantly, jolting forward in my seat, and nearly smashing my head off the dashboard as my car came to a sudden violent halt. At first, I thought someone had snuck into my car and whispered into my ear from the back seat, due to how unfamiliar and close the voice sounded. So, I frantically looked around my car for the perpetrator, until eventually pinning it to the GPS. I soon glanced forward through my windshield and registered what was stood in front of my car. Darkness. That may sound obvious. Of course there would be darkness. It was night, but this darkness was not your average sort. Not the sort you can shine a light at to make it dissipate. No. This darkness was absolute and foreign, like it had a form, despite it being just the absence of light, like it was an ocean of oil, but with none of the shine or glint it usually holds. The hue of my headlights just sunk into its towering form as I gazed at it with a deep, primal sense of dread boiling in my stomach, like I was prey to whatever was in front of me. If I hadn't slammed my brakes in that moment, I would have most surely drove head-on into that darkness that blocked the road. What I did next was idiotic in hindsight, but I suppose incomparability makes you more primed for investigation, despite any flashing warning signs there may be. I got out of my car. My loafers thudded against the tarmac road as I approached the darkness. I stopped a few inches away from it, not that foolish to make contact with it. I stared into that vast sea of blackness that filled my view as I tried my best to understand what it was I was looking at. Then I felt it, a breeze. Not unusual for a cold January night, of course, but it wasn't a cold breeze. It was quite the opposite. Hot, parched, overwhelming, to the point I had to choke back bile from shooting up my throat onto the road. It took me a few seconds to process what it truly was that just wafted onto me, as it was no breeze, it was a breath. The darkness was breathing on me. Feed me. I heard the GPS demand from back in my car, this time louder and angrier, minimalistic even. My fight or flight response instantly kicked in. Immediately I raced back to my car seat, slamming the door behind me as I began to frantically reverse back the way I came. Feed me. Demands began to tumble out of the GPS speaker in an unbroken, slurred chain. It almost sounded desperate as it did hateful. As I backed up down the road, taking the occasional hazardous glance forward, the darkness didn't move. I don't think it even could, but it did protest. Feed me. Feed me. Feed me. Feed me. I retraced my tracks as the demands became deafening to the point I grasped the GPS and tossed it out the window. Yet the demands continued, but through the radio this time and with more howling voices joining the crescendo of desperate demanding. Feed US. Feed US. Feed US. Feed US. With my head twisted around as I maneuvered backwards, I could see that down at least one road at each crossroad, there was that familiar darkness. Fear gripped me so badly. In that moment I thought that my heart may fail. I recklessly swerved around the corners of each crossroad I encountered, each time in the opposite direction of the dark. Feed US. I back-ended the occasional tree trunk and almost nearly swerved into a couple ditches, but I kept moving, until eventually I found myself in the car park of a 24/7 diner. Exhausted, I think I fell asleep upon finding a parking spot. As I began to doze off, I heard my radio crackle out a few words before I fell into a deep slumber. So hungry, so cold, so alone. Lost, lost, lost. Feed US. It's been 2 weeks since then, and I haven't been back to visit my daughter. As far as I am concerned, I'm not stepping foot into those woods ever again. I could hardly gather up the courage to leave during the day upon waking up in that parking lot. I informed my daughter about what had happened and sent photos of my busted taillights and scratched rims, but I can tell she doesn't really believe me. She probably thinks I've reached that age where I've begun to lose myself, and that very well may be the case. But recently, I decided to do a bit of digging into the road network I was traveling that night, and from what I've gathered, 11 people have went missing in those woods last year alone. But that's not what frightens me. What scares me far more than the fact they disappeared is how they all have one thing in common. Each texted a family member one word before they were never heard from again. Lost. Something sinister lived within my paintings. Tom went mad, Gilbert said. Schizophrenia or something, I think. He stopped leaving the place completely. After a month of being pent up inside, he died of starvation. He was a hoarder, a serious one. It took weeks to get the home cleaned up. And even then there's still some junk in the basement the cleaners left there. I'd be curious to have a look and see if there's anything valuable. He snorted. I doubt it though. I sorted through what remained of the clutter and determined most of it to be worthless. There were shelves full of dusty tools and stacks of used furniture. Shoved up against the wall was a large mattress with dirty stained sheets and old clothes piled on top of it. There was one thing I uncovered which did catch my attention. In the far back corner of the basement, something was hidden underneath a white sheet. A chest, turned back to face the wall. Within the chest, I discovered a diary and a stack of paintings. I skimmed through the diary first. Below, I've copied out some of the stranger entries as I read them. I had one of the oddest experiences of my life today. It started with a dream. From what I could recall, I was fleeing from something. I don't remember what it looked like. I know it was huge, Modos cosmic scale, and it wasn't supposed to exist. I'm not sure if that makes sense, but describing the thing at all is difficult for me. I woke up from the dream, with my head throbbing and sweat covering my body. My throat was dry and raw. My ears were ringing. Something felt wrong. When I went outside the following morning, what I saw was bizarre. It looked like a bolt of lightning had struck the ground at the edge of the stretch of hayfields extending past my backyard. The immediate section of corn was blackened and withered, the corn further out a sickly brown color. In the center of the circle of scorched earth sat a hand-sized stone totem. 4 uncanny faces decorated each of its sides. They appeared almost but not quite human. 2 were screaming. The other 2 bore grins which extended unnaturally wide. The piece of stone was stained on one side with a blotch of reddish-brown. The previous homeowner took the totem back to his house and put it in the basement. The next couple of entries deliberated over various other aspects of his life. I was intrigued enough to keep skimming through the diary, and my curiosity was soon rewarded. Something happened to one of my paintings. In writing this down to help me understand it, I have owned the painting for years. It has been here since before my parents moved in. It's the type of thing you live with for such a long time you never really notice it. Yet now, every time I sit in the room with it, I swear I can feel the painting watching me. He went on to describe the painting, an old man sitting on a table with a walking stick in one hand, the other holding a pair of spectacles up to his eyes. When he had examined it closer, Tom noticed something about the painting had changed. The man looks different. He looks scared, and there is a long, tall shadow in the shadows behind him, only barely visible, but it's definitely there. After a couple days, I took it off the wall and put it away in the basement. That was when I noticed the idol had fallen off the shelf it had been sitting on. It has shattered into several pieces. The idol no longer gave off the sense of malice. It did when I found it, but that's not to say the feeling has gone. It hasn't. I went back down to the basement. I checked on both the remains of the idol and the watercolor painting. I previously described my discomfort being around the portrait of the old man, but that instinct is gone now. The painting itself appears normal again, just an old man staring at the viewer, with an expression suggesting him to be deep in thought. Upstairs I have a couple of other portraits hanging up around my house. One is of a little waterfall in a forest. Now out of the corner of my eye, I swear I can see something staring out at me from in between 2 trees within the painting. I thought it had to be my imagination, but when I succumbed to paranoia and took a closer look, I realized it wasn't. When I peered close enough, I caught the shadow of something tall in the trees, hunched over to the side at an odd and unnatural angle. More of the portraits in my house have been changed. These changes are both subtle and unnerving. What is stranger is that when one painting changes, the others change back. The shadow of the thing inside the waterfall painting has disappeared. I want to know if what is going on here can be explained rationally, and if it can't, I want to understand what the hell this thing is haunting me. I've thought about it, and I believe getting rid of the remains would be wisest. I can't emphasize enough how uncomfortable it is to share a house with it. The thing possessing my paintings, which must be somehow connected to the fetish. I hate being around the paintings once they've changed. They're not so bad after they've changed back. But whichever painting possesses the visual anomalies feels alive. Not just alive, but hostile. I honestly feel like the thing inside the paintings despises me. I'm not overly superstitious, but I'd be an idiot to deny there was something evil about the idol I discovered out there. Getting rid of the idol didn't work. Getting rid of all of the paintings I've spotted changes in didn't work. It keeps switching between other portraits all around the house. The most recent one it took possession of is a landscape portrait of a small, old-fashioned neighborhood from the 1930s. Something is staring out at me through one window. No more than a hazy blur in the grayness of the glass. I took it down and put it away with the other ones. The following entries described how it moved from one image to another. Tom subsequently developed a phobia of being around portraits and avoided them religiously, going as far as to lock every painting he owned away in his basement. His entries became less and less coherent. He discussed how his world was falling apart. The account he wrote painted a sad picture of a depressed and lonely man who needed help but didn't know how or where to get it. I could hardly make sense of the last couple entries. They read like the ramblings of a madman. I wasn't surprised, since Gilbert told me he had been diagnosed with multiple mental illnesses in the years leading up to his death. Tom scoured his house repeatedly looking for paintings. He claimed to discover different pictures hanging off of his walls every couple of weeks. It became a daily ritual to check his house to make sure no new ones had appeared. He was convinced something awful would happen if the wraith, as he had begun calling it, was left outside of his basement for too long. This was where the readable part of the journal ended. The remaining entries were impossible to make sense of. I took the journal upstairs and sorted through the paintings. They were the same ones the author described. The one at the bottom of the pile was a depiction of a procession of gaunt soldiers from what looked to be WW2, trudging over the remains of a weathered battleground. The soldiers' eyes were fearful and haunted, their faces stark white. This photo scared me in an inexplicable way. The longer I looked at it, the more mad and deranged the faces of the soldiers appeared. The sensation I felt while around it mirrored the one the author had described. The steadily growing sense of uneasiness, which made it difficult to gaze upon the painting for too long. One of the first things I did with the portrait was take a photo of it on my phone. Tom had done the same thing a couple of times previously, and made a dubious claim. According to him, the effects the portrait had on him didn't extend to photos of it, no matter how many he took. He was right. The portrait looked distinctly different on camera. The faces of the soldiers appeared more grim rather than haunted, and the one furthest to the back of the procession wasn't grinning in a deranged way, the way he was in the original picture. I took a couple more photographs, still not quite able to believe it, but they all showed the same thing. At a housewarming party, I showed the war portrait to some friends. They each shared my discomfort when they looked at it. Some of them didn't get the feeling of dread I described immediately, but one by one they each succumbed to it. When I showed them the photos, they confirmed the differences I noticed were real. They complimented me on my photo editing skills, and I had to explain to them that I didn't do any of this. When I proved the fact by taking another photograph, one of my friends came up with an interesting theory. He suggested a special kind of paint could have been used to make the painting appear different in the light of the camera, as a picture was being taken. Keen to get to the bottom of the mystery, I began testing some of the other claims made by Tom in his diary. I placed the WW2 portrait next to a collection of creepy photos I'd found online and printed out. The first time it happened was with a photo of a pale, angular face leering out of a dark background. I couldn't say precisely when it occurred, but the wraith took possession of the photo. What had once been a piece of paper with a generic scary image printed on it was now a dark, almost oppressive presence lying on my desk beside me. Something else happened too. The WW2 portrait changed subtly. The soldiers' faces now looked like they did in the photos I took of the portrait. It worked just as Tom had described in his journal. Whenever I wasn't looking directly at one of the photos, I could swear the face in it had turned around to stare at me. I frequently looked to check this wasn't the case, but this did little to curb my anxiety. The effect of the photos seemed to be cumulative over time. The longer the wraith inhabited one photograph, it began as a persistent and intrusive feeling of uneasiness. The longer I spent around the photographs, the more they troubled me. A white, angular face began showing up in the corner of my eye. I began to understand why Tom spoke of the portraits the way he did, and why he hid so many of them away in the basement. If I shared the same room as the wraith, I couldn't bring myself to remain turned away from it for too long, or to look at it for too long, either. And I wasn't the only one who felt that way. My friends all shared the same sentiment. Once we played a game to see who could look at one of the possessed photos for the longest. The best of us lasted 9 minutes before shuddering, turning away and leaving the room. There were things the wraith could do which Tom never learned about, but I did. All of what I'd seen so far was only the beginning of what the wraith was capable of. One rainy day when I was stuck on a class assignment, I elected to take a break and went out to get a coffee. When I came back, I noticed something looking back at me from my computer screen, which hadn't been there before. It didn't take me long to pick out the subtle differences in the photo on my screen and deduce what had happened. The wraith had transferred itself onto my computer. What I was looking at was a digital copy of the same leering face I showed you earlier. No copy I made of the image file, replicated the cognitive effects of the possessed image or the visual differences the wraith had made to it. Modifying the image itself didn't do anything at first. When I changed it too much, the wraith abandoned the image and reattached itself to another one in the same folder. I put another image into a parent directory, deleted the possessed one, and waited for a response. I didn't have to wait long. The wraith did what I'd predicted it would do, moving to the image in the other directory. A couple of days later, I managed to get it inside of a GIF. The image depicted a girl standing and staring at her reflection. The animated loop was of the reflection leaning forward and beginning to push its face into the other side of the mirror. The wraith added an extra second to the end of the GIF, showing the reflection melting through the glass on the girl's side of the mirror while reaching out for her. This difference was disturbing enough on its own, but I could have sworn the GIF was changing a little more each time it played on my screen. From time to time, the GIF would pop up on screen unprompted, stuck in its ceaseless repetition. I began to feel a vague sense of dread while using my computer, as I feared another occurrence of the wraith flashing up on my screen. It was a stupid thing to be scared of, but I struggled to shake the feeling off. Recently I'd watched a slasher flick, and I decided to see if the wraith would interact with it. Like with the other media, there were tangible differences in the possessed version of the film. The murder scenes were more graphic and lasted longer. The movie concluded with a 10-second shot of the murderer staring into the camera expressionlessly with no music or noise. Upon watching the movie for a second time, several more scenes played out where various characters stopped, fell silent, and stared into the screen as the murderer had done. The movie mutated further each time I watched it. Scenes became glitched, and the subtitles turned into an incomprehensible jumble of characters from a language I couldn't identify. After showing the movie to my friends, they were as unable as I was to explain what they saw. They had seen enough to be convinced the wraith was real, even if I wasn't so sure of the fact myself. However, none of us were scared by the idea. We were fascinated. We were debating what it meant when one of them brought up an intriguing suggestion. This little group of ours was in the middle of working on a horror game. It was a passion project. The five of us, Mike, George, me, Nick, Hayden, and Matthew, had envisioned during our first year together at college. The wraith can inhabit all kinds of media, George said, leaning in. What if it could inhabit a video game? At his urging, I moved the possessed movie file into the game folder on my computer. When this didn't have an effect, I deleted the file the wraith had possessed. It turned up in an image file again. Why this time? A texture within the game. The game we were working on was an exploration of a large, liminal landscape. There was little story or background, mythos, just wandering through an eerie world with an atmosphere inspired by titles ranging from the old Silent Hill games to active worlds. Even though little in the game had been tangibly changed, playing it was a totally different experience. There was an unshakable sense something was hidden in the game with us, something which wasn't supposed to be there. George in particular was blown away by what the game had become. He got it into his head that we had to find a way to put the wraith into all copies of the game. Then we would release the game and everyone would get to experience what we did while playing it. He was certain it would be a massive success if we could achieve this madness. He went as far as to claim it might end up being one of the most successful indie horror titles of all time. I brought up the significant issue with his plan. There could only be a single copy of the haunted game. My friends could only experience the game like I did when they played it on my computer. Streaming or otherwise recording the game couldn't effectively recapture the effect playing it had. He suggested running the game files through a special program to create duplicates of the wraith, though it seemed like a dubious prospect to me. I agreed to transfer the file onto a USB drive to give to him. He was convinced he could pull it off, and his excitement at the idea was contagious. For the next couple of months, George dedicated himself to development of the game. The work he did during this time was impressive. In one live stream, he toured us through a life-size sports stadium and a fully furnished shopping mall. He wanted the experience of the game to be unique for everyone who played it. For this, he had decided to make the world procedurally generated. It was an overly ambitious goal, but George was adamant he could pull it off, and he already had the code to prove it. The progress Head made was great, but it wasn't what we cared about. We wanted to hear about what Head done with the wraith. George admitted he was struggling to control the thing. It was skipping through files in the game too fast for him to keep track of. He assured us he would get on top of the issue and fulfill his promise. We just needed to be patient. George was a binge worker. He was typically either procrastinating or feverishly working on something. We were used to seeing him worn out after staying up late, completing an assignment the night before it was due. I bring this up to explain why we weren't initially concerned when we noticed the way George looked during classes. We did get a bit worried when he started skipping classes and missed a pair of exams. That concern evolved into worry when Nick overheard he'd bailed out on a family reunion. We reached out to him. He admitted his insomnia had come back. He tried to play it all off like it wasn't a big deal, and promised us he intended to see a doctor. 2 weeks later, George shared with us another milestone in the game's development. The Stalker was a new idea George had added into the game. It would come out after a certain amount of time had elapsed in-game. The Stalker was supposed to be a physical manifestation of the feeling of something hidden just behind every corner and lurking beyond the walls of fog that the Wraith elicited. We were a little peeved Head updated the game in such a major way without consulting with any of us. We might have argued about it. However, George was the lead developer of the game and currently the only one working on it at the time. Over the course of the 2-hour livestream, he wandered the empty landscapes of the game, searching for the Stalker, and we sat watching him. For the first 30 minutes, he traversed a metropolis full of stone-still figures staring out of windows from buildings rising unnaturally far into the sky. He wandered around a town square with an oversized circular fountain, where every building was obscured by a dense layer of stagnant mist. The creepy atmosphere of the game was offset by banter between us as we watched him play. Yet, there was only so long we could fill the void of silence as George roamed restlessly around the empty world. He remained uncomfortably quiet, hardly responding to our attempts to start a conversation, and he became more irritable each time we tried to talk to him. "I think I see it," George announced over the live stream suddenly. I didn't see anything. Neither did any of the other viewers who were still tuned in. His avatar had stopped and was staring off toward the slope of a hill upon which a single lonely skyscraper rose into the sky. His next comment came after another minute of silence. "I keep walking toward this thing, but it doesn't seem like I'm getting any closer. It has turned around, I think." His avatar wasn't moving at all. He hadn't moved since he claimed to have seen the Stalker. There was another pause. "You see it, don't you?" We all agreed that we could see nothing. "I see its face. Bloody hell. There's something wrong with it. It's..." The livestream continued for a while with George's avatar staring off into the depths of the grey gloom. We didn't hear another word from him. After a full day of no contact from George Dice, went over to his place to check on him in person. George laughed his behavior off, telling me he'd felt a little sick and decided to take a break. He refused to acknowledge how strangely he'd been acting during the live stream. He couldn't remember seeing the Stalker at all, and he couldn't remember how the live stream ended. Following this incident, George began to deteriorate more rapidly. His insomnia got worse. You could see signs of it whenever he bothered attending class. He started nodding off frequently. He was always staring off into space with a dull look in his eyes, hardly acknowledging the world going on around him. George had started a blog a year prior as a game dev diary to keep the small community of fans the game had attracted up to date on its progress. By that time, it had become the main way he communicated with the outside world. "I'm sorry for all the delays in releasing the alpha. Development has been complicated by bugs and some other personal issues going on in my life. A lot of you have been asking, who is the Stalker? I've been thinking about this a lot recently, deliberating over whether it's better to leave it a mystery for the player to imagine, or if I should give a backstory to uncover as they explore. I would appreciate your input on this. I'm hoping to release an update to the demo to show off some of the new stuff I've patched in. I'm looking for playtesters. Tell me you hate the game if you want. I just want to hear some honest input from people. I had a dream last night. In the dream, I was wandering around in circles inside a city. It soon dawned on me that I was stuck inside the game. The Stalker was there. It took off its face as if it was some kind of mask. What I saw after that frightened me enough to run like hell away from it. I wish I could tell you what it was I saw, but all I can recall is a haze. I kept running until I couldn't anymore. When I stopped and checked behind me, the Stalker was gone. Then somehow I was back where I began my journey. I started to walk again for whatever reason. As is the case many times in dreams, I was unable to control my own actions. Later, I found myself at the tall building where I first saw the Stalker, and the events of the dream repeated themselves. I was confronted with the entity again. It took off its face, and I saw what lay beneath, and I ran in terror. This cycle repeated over and over. Each time the entity revealed itself as something horrifying, though once again, I can't remember its appearance. I couldn't tell you if it had a different face each time or the same one. The dream lasted an uncomfortably long time. It was longer than any other dream I've ever had. When I woke up from it, I felt as exhausted as if I had spent the whole night awake. I have these dreams every night. They last so long, and they seem too real. When I wake up from them, I feel as if I haven't slept at all. I find it increasingly difficult to focus during the day, and I've become accustomed to feeling maddeningly tired all the time. I didn't know it was possible to want to sleep so badly, and yet find it so bloody hard to get any proper rest. The sleeping pills aren't working anymore. I take them anyway. I'm very dependent on them, and I don't have the energy to deal with the side effects of quitting. At least they make me feel a little less crappy for a while. Weeks passed before another update was made. I think there were a pair of deleted posts written during the period, but I couldn't recover them. Here is the last thing he ever posted. Hi everyone. I need to focus on my mental health for a while. I will be pausing work on game development for now. I'm sorry for all of you who expected a release soon. I can't say when an alpha is going to arrive. I'm either going to pick up this game again, to be honest. For anyone still tuned in, this is goodbye. For now. We'd had a talk with him, and finally gotten George to understand how seriously he needed help. Had been persuaded to speak to a new doctor about his sleep issues, and he came back with a new prescription. He also acknowledged how obsessed he had become with the game, and agreed to take a break from working on it. He was still in a bad state, but had taken the first steps in getting his life back together. I made a mistake then, though I didn't realize it at the time. I allowed George to keep the possessed copy of the game, as long as the wraith remained in his life. Its grip on his mind would never loosen, not understanding that truth cost George everything. A couple of days after our last exchange, George was found dead in his apartment. It was a seizure, the doctors said. The seizure caused apnea, which was what caused his sudden death. The scene must have been traumatizing for his mother, who discovered him in his apartment. When Shed found him, he was lying on the floor. The room was dark except for the flickering light of his computer. It was locked on the game world. George was spread-eagled, his face turned to the side, and one of his arms was dislocated. It felt like so little time ago that I was hanging out at George's place with a pile of pizzas and some drinks, and we were laughing at some silly game he'd created over the weekend for a game jam. The George I remembered was a totally different person from the haggard and mottled skeleton of a person we saw at the funeral. The game was abandoned. After a couple months passed, we began working on a new project together, but without George there to guide and motivate us. It lacked the passion and drive it needed to get anywhere. Soon enough, we abandoned it too. As for the wraith, it sat untouched within an unidentified file on George's computer for a while. His home remained undisturbed for close to a year. George's mother eventually decided to clean up the apartment. She asked us if there was anything of his we wanted to keep. After some deliberation, I agreed to be the one to go back there to retrieve his computer containing the possessed copy of the game. My friends and I replayed the game to make sure the wraith hadn't moved again. Once we agreed that it was still inhabiting the game, we deliberated on what to do with it. We decided we couldn't dispose of the computer. The wraith would transfer itself to another conduit, and with the new item, it would prey on someone else, perhaps another one of us. After some debate, we agreed to have it sealed away instead. We hoped it might remain inactive if it was isolated from people, as it had been before I moved into the house. Nick rented out a storage unit. We locked the hard drive of the computer in a safe box, and we left it there. We hoped to never have to lay eyes on it again. For a couple of years our plan actually worked. Nothing could replace the piece of our lives the wraith had stolen, but at least now we knew it wouldn't hurt anyone else. Things were complicated when the storage space was robbed. Nothing was stolen from the unit we'd rented, but the one next door was completely trashed. Nick elected to move the safe box and its contents to a new, more secure location. Just in case, he said, somewhere along the journey moving it. I believe the wraith abandoned the hard drive and attached itself to something in Nick's car. From there it followed him home and silently slipped into his life. We didn't figure out this had happened until much later. Since graduating college, Nick had become a successful voice actor. He found roles in some video games and a couple of minor TV shows. Nick was also an aspiring ventriloquist, something he picked up from his father. His father had been a semi-popular ventriloquist during his time, and Nick liked to talk about continuing his legacy. It should be noted, Nick had never been great at ventriloquism. He was convinced he was good at it, but he really wasn't. He loved doing acts on stage, but very few could sit through the performances and feel entertained the way he entertained himself. He had a very off-brand kind of humor that only he seemed to understand, and he didn't take criticism of his acts very well. The fact was, Nick was a great voice actor, and he had the technique down perfectly for making the dummy appear as if it were talking, but he just couldn't put together an interesting script, and that ruined his performances. Everything changed when the Wraith returned in its newest form a couple months later. Nick introduced his audiences to Tommy, the ventriloquist dummy he claimed to have discovered stashed away inside the depths of his basement. Nick played the role of a submissive character to the dummy, who subjected him to sharing with the audience embarrassing and controversial stories of their years spent together. It was a new kind of act, and quite different from the material he relied on previously, and it worked out great. The new content was engaging and funny, and it stood him out from his competitors. In a couple of weeks, he had gone from being a local bar performer to a local sensation. I knew the first time I saw him perform with Tommy in person that something was wrong with the dummy. I wasn't the only one who felt that way, either. My friends shared my suspicions. My fear was all but confirmed after we visited Nick in person. After one show, when I looked into the dummy's dead white eyes, I sensed something staring back at me. I felt the same way I did when I played our unfinished game, and the way I felt being around the possessed portraits. Nick patiently explained that we were silly to be worried about him. The dummy wasn't possessed or haunted, he said with a chuckle. He'd convinced himself everything that happened with George was a result of a mental health crisis, and the Wraith never really existed in the first place. The more we pushed him, the more irritable he became. He laughed at us. He called us crazy and claimed we were jealous of his success. He told us we were all pathetic, and then threatened to stop speaking to us if we didn't drop the issue. We were still arguing with one another about how to get him to see sense when an unexpected opportunity presented itself. A few weeks later, Nick asked me to review a new act he was working on. I was the only one on good terms with him at the time, but I managed to convince Nick to allow his friends to come over so they could apologize to him in person for the previous fight. The three of us had agreed to try something more radical. When we came over to visit, Matthew and Hayden, once they'd both convinced Nick of their remorse, we asked to see his newest act, and he settled in to show it to us. The moment he got the dummy out, we sprung into action. His reaction was comical. He refused to give up on his act as we tried to snatch Tommy out of his hands. The dummy begged him for help as we tried to wrestle it away from him. It started laughing as he chased us through the house, its jaw swinging up and down as Nick ran after us. Nick was making the hysterical laughing sound, and yet simultaneously wore a completely horrified expression on his face. Once we'd made our escape, we smashed it into pieces with a hammer and threw the remains into the trash. The very next day, Nick was back on stage with the same dummy, which didn't have a scratch on it, acting like nothing had happened. He refused to speak to any of us again after that. We returned to researching the origins of the entity, hoping to find a way to get rid of the source of our problems. I won't get into this much, because it was a futile exercise. When we asked for help online, the responses we got ranged from disbelieving to making fun of us. We talked to two people who claimed they could help us, but they both turned out to be trolls. That was about the extent of it. The Wraith was manipulating Nick, I suspected. It gave him a taste of fame and success like he'd never experienced before, and got him drunk on it. He quickly became dependent on the dummy since he couldn't perform without it. Over time, Nick's performances became increasingly disturbing and provocative. I continued to see them sporadically after our fallout, still convinced I could somehow get through to him. They were difficult to sit through. He knew certain things about the audience, who he frequently interacted with. The interactions he shared with people left many uncomfortable or offended. Others were entertained by his uncanny abilities and provocative personality. I saw people who were in hysterics after watching his performances and talked to others who were religious, fanatic fans of his. As its grip over his mind tightened, Nick began to talk to the dummy outside of shows. This was first spotted by his family, but it became obvious to everyone else around him in time. He had begun taking it with him wherever he went. Near the end, his brother claimed he never saw Nick without Tommy latched onto him. It had become his permanent companion, a part of him. This behavior didn't do wonders for his reputation, but by then he had accumulated a loyal band of followers who didn't care how eccentric and messed up he acted. The Wraith gave him the success he'd dreamed of since he was a child, but it did so at an unspeakable price. As for what happened to Nick, we never figured out a way to help him. The last place he was ever seen was somewhere strange called the Grand Circus of Mysteries. He worked there for a while as one of the star performers before inexplicably disappearing off the face of the earth following a particularly disturbed act. The dummy left with him, but I had no doubt the thing living inside it was still lurking out there somewhere. I lost track of the entity for a while after it had finished with Nick. I assumed it had gone on to haunt somebody else's life. Personally, I wanted nothing more to do with it. My remaining moved out of town, and I soon lost contact with them. I think we all felt responsible for failing Nick, and we saw each other as reminders of this failure. It was better for all of us if we put the past behind us and moved on with our separate lives. I was watching the news one day some years later. The anchor began discussing a sinkhole which had appeared in a stretch of desolate plains outside of my hometown. They described it as a black hole in the ground which sucked in all the light from around it. I visited the place in person a couple days later. By then half the people in town had gone over to take a look. I approached close enough to lean over and look down into the depths of the cave. When I gazed into the abyss, I felt something deep within staring back up at me. There, I fell into a kind of daze. I felt as if I were falling into the blackness. The world around me became unreal and distant. My wife, who'd gone out there with me, claimed I stood over the hole for over a minute, swaying slightly as I stared down into it. It was her who broke me out of my trance. She had to slap me several times before I returned to my senses. By then, I was leaning over far enough that she swore I was about to fall in. I've been keeping track of the sinkhole since I visited it. I heard a group of kids dared someone to venture inside shortly after I went there. Jeff, I believe his name was. He reappeared a couple of days later, with no recollection of having gone missing. I saw an older version of this boy in the news the other day, nearly 10 years later. After I heard about what he did, I figured it was time for me to finally get this story out there. I'm guessing the Wraith has moved on from him by now. Perhaps it returned to the sinkhole, or maybe it has attached itself to a new conduit. Wherever it is, I don't doubt it is searching for another victim. Stay safe out there. The ones behind the glass. Jesus Christ. This much for a 4-hour shift. The man thought, squinting through the black blindfold. The road bumped beneath him. The engine hummed, broken only by radio chatter from the men in camouflage. A few moments later, metal clanged. A gate, maybe. This was his best guess, and the vehicle rolled inside. When the blindfold came off, the first thing he saw was a meek-looking woman in office attire. A stark contrast to the camo, boots and rifles around her. He was dropped off in a massive concrete complex, its only feature a cement outcropping at the center, surrounded by 3 layers of metallic rings. Hello. The woman greeted him, checking her clipboard. Gideon, was it? Former janitor at a state elementary. You have children? Yes, a little girl and the one's already married. He nodded, still taking in the vastness and strangeness of everything. The woman paused for a moment. Gideon could have sworn he heard her mutter beneath her breath, something along the lines of, "Those fucking idiots." They walked alone as the woman listed benefits, wages, hazard pay. Gideon half listened, his mind preoccupied with the questions he had coming here, questions still unanswered. Then, she stopped at the small bunker in the center. Her expression turned serious. Here we are. The pay is good, and the hours are short. I still don't even know what the job is. The ad didn't say anything. Are there any applicants? He laughed. But the woman didn't return a polite smile. Instead, she gestured for him to step inside. The bunker led to a large window pane fitted with a one-way mirror. Gideon knew, for there were multiple yellow signs around the window, one standing out to be a skull and crossbones. Gideon's eyes widened in shock. Inside, the room was adorned with painted giraffes and elephants, a hanging star in the center, and soft, comfortable mats on the floor. 8 children played inside, or at least Gideon thinks so. None of them looked older than 10, clothed elegantly with dresses, ribbons, blouses, and long-sleeved shirts. 1. The woman pressed a finger gently to his lips, silencing him. She shook her head, then flicked her eyes toward the children. "They must not hear you," she whispered. "It's your first task." Even then, a little boy holding a pencil and a book perked his ears up. He stared at Gideon for a moment before turning back to play. "It's up to you. You will still receive a severance pay equal to a 1-year work outside if you leave now. But a week working here will be equal to 20 years pay outside. After 1 week you leave and never come back." Gideon gulped. That kind of money can put through his little girl the life he never had. A better school, a better house, a better life than he did. The absurdity of the amount wasn't lost on him, but that kind of money, he will never forgive himself to walk away from that. "Am I a nanny?" he whispered, trying to make sense of it. "For rich people, nanny for the minister's kids. I'm good with kids." The woman offered no explanation. She only repeated her offer. "Leave or stay," placing the NDA and a brown envelope side by side on a table. Silence filled the room, even with the visible laughter and conversations of the children next door. "You'll do it," Gideon replied, grabbing the brown envelope filled with crisp 1,000 bills and signing the NDA. The woman smiled, handing him a thin booklet stamped with an alphabet agency he has never heard of, also giving him the keys for a small pantry, a bedroom, comfort room, and an unlabeled room. He flipped through pages as the woman walked away. "Be quiet. Never talk to them. They are not human, nor children." And the last 2 rules made Gideon realize the secrecy, the absurd salary were necessary. It was too late. The thick metal blast doors came down. "Execute the one who cries. Use the gun when you kill the wrong one." The last rules came with exhaustive details of instructions. The method: an electric chair. The process: take one to the room to the left and dispose of the body by burning it first, then dissolving the remains in a concentration of nitric acid. What the fuck? Is this for real? Gideon charged up the blast doors and pounded on it, demanding an explanation. He pounded on it till his fists were sore and throat dry. As he turns around to plan his next course, what he saw sent a chill up to his spine. As if they were a Renaissance painting, the children looked directly through the mirror, directly at him, or at what made the noises. A larger boy pressing his face up to the mirror. Snot, saliva, sweat, and all. A small girl stopped chewing her toy to look at him. An even younger girl, who must be the youngest, were trying her hardest to break the window. Both Gideon and them stood still for a moment until the speaker above the nursery cracked. It then played a mixture of violins and piano, producing a melancholic and haunting melody echoing throughout the bunker and the nursery. It seemed to have an effect to the children, for they cleaned their eyes, wiped off their snot, and continued playing as if nothing out of the ordinary happened. And yet not all of them did. The smallest girl with the ribbon, who was moments ago breaking her fists to crack open the window, was waving at the window, her knuckles skin split, soaked in sweat and blood, making a disgusting mixture. Another speaker cracked, this time in a low womanly voice at Gideon's side. "Remember the handbook, Gideon. They are not what they seem. If you ever want to see your daughter again, you best follow a net and a pistol at the pantry." The speaker grumbled, losing its words, seemingly dying down for good. Gideon's, both mind and heart raced. There the woman is telling him to murder a little child, a girl not older than his child. "Mister," the child with the ribbon cried, her voice muffled but not completely. "Are you there? Is the bad lady gone? You can trust her." He cautiously walked towards the glass, bending down slightly. "How so?" "Open the door and I'll tell you." He stopped in his tracks, retreating back. "Mister, come back." The child with the ribbon growing visibly frustrated, frothing at the mouth like a rabid dog. "You moron, you can get things right." "Come back here," she roared, resuming to pound the glass, spittering licks of blood all over the pane. "That's why your eldest never visits you. You fucking failure. Who works as a janitor for 15 years? You know what? The best thing you can do for Marion is to go kill yourself. Imagine that sweet girl coming home to a smelly, worthless old man." Marion, Gideon's youngest. In an impulse, he struck the glass in front of the ribbon child, where she burst out laughing. Thankfully, the glass stood strong. Gideon left, into the pantry, and he needed time to think, to what to do and what the hell is he doing here. He woke up to an alarm, neither blaring nor bright, but enough to warrant his attention. Gas seemed to seep inside the bunker, but then came the music. Again. He grabbed the pistol, holstering it beneath his shirt, for when he arrived at the window, there were 9 heads of hair, some with ribbons, some with hair clips, all of them like normal children, like humans, yet not all of them. A sobbing girl sat at the corner, tearful, trying to wipe off snot with her dress sleeve. Gideon stared for quite a while, as her cheeks were too thin, but the bob hair was right. The dress was familiar, but why would that be there? "Honey?" he whispered. "No, no, no. I'll get you out." While the other children were absent-minded, Gideon finally opened the door to the nursery, a hand on the gun. "Come here, honey. Quick." Marion ran towards him, hugging him tightly. He scooped her up as fast as he closed the door. "It was scary here, Daddy. Mommy told me you would come. Always." As she hugged Gideon, the children swarmed the glass, their skin and sweat sticking to the window pane, their eyes twitching and moving rapidly, as if seeking something. Then they laughed and laughed. "Your mom died long ago." Gideon pushed the girl aside. "You were 3 when she died. Who the fuck are you?" "I remember Mommy," she meekly replies amidst whimper and tears. "What are you saying, Dad?" "You know she's not real, Gideon," says a deep voice behind the glass, as if mimicking him. "Come on, let's do this and go home." "You're so close. Come on, do it. One more mistake and you're free." "Daddy, why are you doing this?" Marion yells on the ground. Another girl behind the glass mimicked her, and another, and another. The speaker crackled back to life. "Check your pocket, Gideon." It was a message. "Honey, Dad, where are you? You forgot to pick me up from school." Something in Gideon snapped. He dragged Marion over the room, strapping her onto the electric chair. She struggled, kicked him with all her might, crying and whimpering, yelling for her mommy and daddy. He stared at what appeared to be Marion, whilst he lowered the lever. For a brief moment, something in him sparked, for what if he was wrong? He gripped the lever with trembling hands. Beads of sweat rolled down his temple. What if he was wrong? This isn't her. Right. He pulled the lever as Marion's desperate, wailing echoed throughout the bunker. Even as his hands shook like never before, his heart raced like it will jump out. For a second, nothing happened. Then her body jerked upright, her limbs flailing, if not for the straps. Her tears sizzled into a white smoke. Her lips parted, as if to say something. "Dad." Her small eyes locked at him, even as the light dimmed inside, flickering as if a candle in its last legs. The stench of burnt hair and flesh ripped Gideon's senses. It was done. The children stared, not grieving, not happy, just watching. "You really did do it," the ribbon girls tells him. "Wrong one." Then the nursery erupted in laughter. "He got the wrong one," yells the one laughing on the floor. "We sent that message, you moron. It always gets them every time." Gideon fell onto his knees, watching his lifeless daughter's arms burnt. The cold stare of Marion at the wall. It was all too much. "Use the gun if you kill the wrong one." He opened the door, aiming at the first child he sees. Their faces contorted in terror. The smaller one tried to attack, but a bullet stopped her. He pulled the trigger, and again, the children ran and screamed, until all but one bullet remained. A few moments later, as Gideon's ears bled with the gunshots, the girl dressed with a ribbon, who received one at the forehead, rose up. "The gun wasn't for us, imbecile. It was for you." For Gideon, it was the last thing he could do, for nothing in the world was worse than what he had committed. For the entertainment of some otherworldly creatures, he had murdered his own flesh and blood. And for Gideon, a bullet lodged in his skull is easier than leaving. What Gary saw, the bus pulled away. I stood alone in front of the gas station, hating my life. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the cracked pavement, making the place feel even more isolated. My afternoon shift began at 5 p.m. and ended at midnight. My boyfriend had agreed to pick me up most days, but the idea of leaving so late still wasn't thrilling. Obviously, it wasn't my first choice of work, but money was money, and I needed a job. I pushed open the glass door. A small bell jingled above me, but the place felt empty. The shelves were lined with dusty snacks and overpriced car accessories. Behind the counter stood the grumpiest-looking man I had ever seen, staring at the register like he wanted to punch it. A name tag hung onto the front of his shirt. Greg, manager. "Hello, you're Sarah," he said, barely looking up. "Yeah. Lockers in the back," he huffed. "Use Gary's." Him sharing with someone else? Nah. I fired him last week. About time. He was slow in the head. Couldn't even scan barcodes right. Eyes pointed sideways. Couldn't understand a flippin' word he was saying. Thought we could save some money with him as a cheap hire. But the rotard probably lost us more than that. I hesitated before nodding. All right. Before I could turn away, the door behind me jingled again. A man in a worn baseball cap and flannel jacket stepped inside, balancing a couple of small packages. He turned to me. "You must be the new girl," he said, his voice warm and friendly. He had a slight southern accent. "Great to meet you," I said, relieved that at least someone here seemed nice. "I'm Martin," he said, setting the boxes down on the counter and shaking my hand. "I come by a few times a day, mostly deliveries, but most of the time, it'll just be you and Greg." He glanced at Greg, whose face was scrunched into a permanent frown, then looked back at me. "Bless your heart," he said with pity, then left. I forced a smile at Greg before heading to the locker room. The room was cramped, and the air inside was stale. A set of 2 lockers sat on top of each other. The bottom one, with a padlock, had a paper sticker label that read Martin in black Sharpie, and the one above it said Gary. I pulled it open and was about to dump my coat and bag inside when I spotted a small beat-up paperback notebook tucked in the corner. The book had a brown cover and worn edges, the paper soft from use. I flicked through the notebook. The first page was filled with squares and lines, and the rest with other doodles, circles, swirls, stick figures, little animals. Some of the pages had been pressed so hard the marks left grooves in the paper. Picturing a mentally disabled man being shouted at by Greg every other minute, I chewed the inside of my cheek. I set the notebook on top of the lockers so that if Gary ever came back, it would be there waiting for him. Then I got to work cleaning the place for the evening. Apart from the main shop, there was just a locker room, a break room and a bathroom in the back with a clogged sink. I was glad it wasn't a huge area to clean at least, and already pretty spotless. I served some customers for a few hours and went to the break room to have my dinner. Martin was in there, scarfing down a pepperoni pizza. "How's it going?" he asked, taking another bite. We had a chat and I asked him about Gary. "Yeah, he got the boot last week," Martin confirmed. "He was this handicapped guy customers kept complaining about. A woman came in and asked him if there was a bathroom. He pointed at the locker room, should seen the look on Greg's face." Martin chuckled to himself. After I had settled into the new job, the days passed by surprisingly quickly. Sometimes it was unnerving being alone at the till when it was dark out, but otherwise nothing out of the ordinary really happened. I was told the morning was busier, which I suspected, as usually max 10 people would come during my entire shift. One night as I was cleaning, I checked my phone. Still no messages from my boyfriend. Annoyed he was running late, I grabbed the vacuum and started cleaning through the aisles trying to pass the time. As I was cleaning, the pattern I was moving in seemed familiar, like déjà vu. I was walking through a snake-like path of 6 rows. Then it occurred to me. Was that the pattern I had seen in the first page of Gary's notebook? I propped the vacuum against a shelf and went to the locker room, plucking the notebook off the top of the lockers. Indeed, there were 5 straight rectangular lines inside a larger box, creating 6 spaces between them. The lines weren't just random markings, they were the shelves between the aisles. Next to the big box were a few smaller boxes. I realized one was the locker room on the far left, next to it was the break room, and on the adjacent side was a box that must represented the bathroom. Perhaps Gary wasn't as dim as they thought. I smiled to myself. Then there was one more box behind the one in the locker room's position, which was shaded in. Frowned. Looking back up, from where I stood, the store had 4 rooms. There was no 5th. I looked down at the notebook again. The extra room was marked right next to the locker room. I turned toward the locker room door, staring at it. A large filing cabinet with a bunch of cardboard boxes stacked on top of it stood in the corner. I nudged the cabinet forward a little. "Just wall," Then I heard footsteps across the shop coming towards the locker room. I shifted the cabinet back into place. Greg emerged in the locker room doorway, arms crossed. His eyes flicked around the room before landing on me. "Your boyfriend's looking for you," he said flatly. "Right, thanks." Greg didn't move as I walked past him, but I could feel his eyes lingering on me. I tried to shake it off as I stepped outside into the cool night air with my boyfriend. For the next week of my shift, I started feeling anxious every time I entered the locker room and saw the cabinet for some reason. I even moved the cabinet a few times to check a secret door hadn't appeared. Maybe there used to be a room behind there, or Gary's drawing wasn't accurate. After a while, I naturally forgot about it, until I began noticing something about Martin. Most of the time, he took boxes from deliveries straight to the break room, where we kept extra stock and supplies. That made sense. Greg would unpack them for me to stack onto the shelves. But every few days, at the end of the day just before I left, I saw him taking large packages to the locker room. He would come out empty-handed. When I entered the locker room after, I never saw any packages. I bumped into him entering the locker room with a large package one night. "Oh hey, see you tomorrow," he said, and he immediately turned back out of the room with the package, heading towards the break room. As I was about to leave that night, I saw him exit the break room and walk with the package back towards the locker room. One night I moved the cabinet again. As expected, nothing out of the ordinary. But this time, before I replaced the cabinet, I looked down. I noticed a faint, large square-shaped outline on the ground where the cabinet had been sitting. There was a small key-shaped hole inside the square to one side. I stared in disbelief, then stepped on the area a few times. It moved slightly, so this was where the Martin's packages had been mysteriously disappearing. Footsteps were getting closer. I shoved the cabinet back into place and left the room. Greg stood silently, right outside against the wall, startling me as I walked out. "Giving yourself a break, I see?" I shook my head and went back to the till. For the next few days, I didn't attempt to move the cabinet again. I was afraid of being caught, but the uncomfortable feeling lingered. There was probably nothing interesting down there, but a part of me was certain such a well-hidden door would hold secrets behind it. And perhaps Gary was fired for discovering something he shouldn't have. On a pitch-black Friday night, my boyfriend turned on the engine and was about to drive us away, when I spotted Martin taking a parcel out of the back of his van. It was one of those larger boxes he sometimes brought to the locker room. I watched him as he walked into the gas station, having left his van doors open. Curiosity overwhelmed me. "Babe, hold on a sec. I'll be back," I said. I jumped out of the passenger side and ran across the parking lot until I was standing just outside the open doors. Stacks of cardboard boxes were taped up tightly. I stepped into the van and pushed one of the boxes closest to the entrance of the back of the van. It shifted slightly, and I could tell there were multiple smaller items inside, but the sound of liquid was unmistakable. My eyes drifted to a sheet of paper on top of the box. I picked it up. Heart X10. Tick. Liver X10. Tick. Kidney X10 pairs. Tick. I looked back and spotted Martin coming out of the gas station. Then, he spotted me too. We locked eyes, and he looked surprised at first, but then his expression turned into one of rage. He normally had an easygoing expression, so seeing his face contort like that was genuinely the stuff of nightmares. He started sprinting towards the van. I jumped out so fast I hit the floor rolling, then got up and ran as fast as I could towards my boyfriend's car. "We're getting the fuck out of here. Let's go. Let's fucking go," I yelled as I slammed the door shut. I called the cops as we sped away, and explained everything, from discovering Gary's notebook and the secret door to the boxes in Martin's van. Greg and Martin were promptly arrested. The cops discovered refrigerators full of boxes of human organs underneath the locker room, and they were charged with organ trafficking and money laundering. They had been smuggling them as part of a larger operation, and distributing them to buyers around the country from the dark web. Gary was a mentally disabled man who had been an employee at the gas station before I joined. For a while, I worried about Gary's safety, but that concern didn't last long. He was found and arrested the next day. Turns out he wasn't just a bystander. He had been coerced into the operation, fully complicit in the horrors unfolding behind that hidden door. Maybe the law will go easier on him, given that his brain never matured past that of a 6-year-old. But there's one detail I doubt they'll overlook. Greg didn't fire him out of pity or frustration. He fired him when he caught him stealing and eating the organs. That's it for tonight's stories, but the nightmares never end. If you enjoyed these chilling tales, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you never miss a new upload. Got a scary experience of your own? Share it in the comments. I just might feature it in a future video. Until next time, stay safe, stay curious, and remember, some things are scarier than they seem in the dark.